Hello, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, and you're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, June 16th. Wow, second half of June. Time is flying by. Just what can I say that hasn't already been said? We have a great show for you today. We've got some two rather long pieces that I think segments that I think you'll enjoy. A couple of good interviews and great way to keep you tied into the tech community and what's going on in our world here of DevOps and DevSecOps, cyber, cloud native, digital transformation. Hope you've been enjoying. You watched yesterday's show. Was I thought a really good show. We've got some really good features today. Let's jump into them. Number one, I have my friend Anders Walgren from Cloudbees. Anders, always a pleasure to catch up with. Anders, has this concept of what he calls the Goldilocks of modern app development. And we'll talk more about it, but, Anders thinks that the key metric that we need to focus in on is features, because that's what matters. We're going to jump more into that in my interview with Anders, but pay attention. It's a good 20-minute interview, and Anders lays out some really good ways of thinking about this. After Anders, we're going to go right into something old today. It's actually from TechStrong Con 2 weeks ago now, and it's my friend Derek Weeks from Sonotype. Derek, of course, leads the all-day DevOps as well as the annual DevSecOps community survey over at Sonotype. And this is a presentation Derek did at TechStrong Con, and it's called Machines Making Software, Paving and Maintaining the Road with Zero Trust Open Source. Good presentation with some really good metrics and information from our friend Derek. So check that out. After Derek, I'll be back with the news, and then we'll turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene's guests today are Don Dewey and Scott Crenshaw of Concourse Labs, and they'll be talking about automated cloud governance. And then after that, Charlene has actually a really good webinar preview. We do anywhere from 3 to 6 webinars a week here at Media Ops, and they're actually, every one of them is different and great, and they're live. A lot of them are now interactive. So Charlene is going to give you a preview of what to expect this week in way of webinars. And then after that, we'll head over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch, where Mitchell Ashley has some interesting guests and commentary. And then it's about that, once a month, our friends over at Gigamon Incident Response do their video podcast, and we have that today. And in this episode, Danny talks with the members of IBM's X-Force Incident Response and Intelligence Services. And we're going to kind of delve in and peel the kimono back on what exactly happens on an incident response team when a breach or incident is discovered, and there's boots on the ground, so to speak. So that'll be an interesting episode, I think, that you'll enjoy. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. So it's a great Tuesday here on TechStrong TV. We've got some great interview sessions lined up for you. We're going to take a commercial right now. I'll be right back.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
All right, our first guest today, as I mentioned, is my friend Anders Walgren from Cloudbees. You know, I know Anders a long time, back to when he was CTO at Electric Cloud, acquired by Cloudbees, obviously. And one of the reasons I really enjoy talking with Anders is he's a thinker, right? He really thinks through, he sees patterns, he has his kind of finger on the pulse of what's happening. And he's able to not just report or mimic back what he sees happening, but really sort of synthesize things and help you give a way of looking at it. And that's what he's done, and he's going to lay it out, a kind of theory that he has of what's really important in development today. And he calls it sort of a Goldilocks zone, where you know, we focused on speed, and we focused on amount of releases, and we focused on so many metrics that, you know, show whether you have a high-performing system or not, or a high-performing IT team or not, rather. And Anders thinks that the real metric we should be focusing on is features. And I got to tell you, in speaking to Anders, to me, this was almost, you know, if you're familiar with Dr. Mick Kirsten over at Desktop, his book From Project to Product, this to me is in that same vein. It's almost a second or a sequel, if you will, or a continuation, which is once we're product focused, we need to be feature focused, because ultimately that's what the customer is looking for, and that's how we should be judging success. Anyway, this is a great interview with Anders. I think you're going to enjoy it. Let's go to it now. Anders Walgren from Cloudbees.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone. This next session here on TechStrong TV features my friend Anders Walgren from Cloudbees. Always great to catch up with Anders. Anders, how are you, man?
Doing well. You know, all things considered, I can't complain. How about yourself?
As they say, could be worse. It could be worse. But yeah, we're doing well here. You know, humming along on TechStrong TV. We've, I think we're about 54, something like that, shows in, episodes. I mean, you know, you know this because you've been on, you know, once or twice before. We started this kind of on the fly because we weren't going to be at conferences broadcasting anymore, and we got the studio in the office. Paul, my video director, comes in and we do interviews, and we the archives, but. Yeah, no, Charlene and Mitchell Ashley, we all every day do a bunch of interviews. Anders, we're pumping 2 to 3 plus hours, you know, Monday to Friday. Actually, we cut it back now to Monday, Tuesday, Thursday since TechStrong Con, only because it was eating me alive, Anders. I had no time. I had no time to run the company. I was so busy doing interviews and recording every day. So we do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday as fresh content shows, and then Wednesday and Friday are kind of from the archives.
The stale content.
Yeah, well, it's not that stale. It's only a month or two old, but I hear you. Anyway, so Anders, the title of our session today is The Three Bears in Goldilocks, right? And most of our audience, I think, is familiar with the Goldilocks tale and what we mean by a Goldilocks zone for, you know, for planets and stuff. But I don't know if we've told the tale of the three bears in Goldilocks from a DevOps perspective. Why don't you tell us?
It's you know, I'm always about analogies, right? To me, it's one of the most powerful ways to explain and give insight and those sorts of things. And I've been toying around with the Goldilocks, kind of phenomenon as it relates to software development life cycles and projects in general. And kind of, if you think back 15 years, the thing that we cared about the most was the build. I mean, we still care about the build, no question, right? They're still important. CI is a huge component of being successful in software delivery, but builds are too small. They don't really deliver incremental value per se. It's ideally it's one commit or a couple of commits or a pull request or two and those sorts of things. And then on the other hand, and again, if you go back 10 or 15 or more years, we've got releases. Releases are these big giant things historically, right? So we've kind of been stuck between these two things, one of which is too small, builds, and one of which is too big, and especially if you think back to the old days of 18-month release cycles and the death march to release and all of those sorts of things. And so we've kind of been stuck in between where we got very focused on CI and very focused on, making our releases smaller. And then I think, of course, there's been huge success in that in terms of smaller batch sizes and those kinds of things. And I think now that we get to the point where, and I don't want to say that we've solved all of these problems, but I think we understand them a lot more than we do. And a lot of us are solving these problems better than we used to. We've kind of, if we got good at this too small part, which is builds, and we're kind of getting better and pretty good in some cases on the release, but the releases are still kind of big. The thing that's just right is the feature, right? The feature is the thing that is the unit of value, the quanta of value, if you want to get really geeky about it, that we deliver to a customer, right? And that feature could be, it could be a bug fix, or it could be a security patch, or it could be new, brand new functionality that I haven't seen before. But from a customer perspective, from a consumer of technology perspective, I really only care about the things that I care about that are in a release. I don't care about all the other things, and it kind of drives me a little batty. I was going to use a different version of that word, but drives me a little batty when you get a new app or something, a new version of an app on your phone, and the release notes say, "We've squashed bugs and made improvements." Right? Because to me, that's the laziest thing in the world. And it probably also tells me that you don't really know what's going into your releases, which is a little bit scary and kind of comes back to the idea that if you don't think about what's going out in terms of the value that you're adding, what's the new functionality, what's the improved functionality, what are the bugs that we fixed, what are the security issues that we've addressed, and those sorts of things, then you're not thinking about it at the right scale, and getting into that zone where you can think and manage at the level of features. And you can sort of say, look, I have enough data and I have enough control over the situation that I can say this feature is more important than that feature. So let's move some resources over to this feature and get that out sooner. We'll pull this one out and be able to do that. And I think as we got pretty good at CI and as we got better at doing larger releases, what we're starting to focus on now, kind of at the at the tip of the spear, if you will, at the margin of improvement, is thinking about things in terms of features, and thinking in terms of not, we have a release, what can we pour into it, but what's the fastest way that I can get this chunk of value into the hands of my customer, and independent of all the other chaos that's happening, right? How do I shepherd this thing through, and how do I set up my systems, my data, my automation, my orchestration, all of my systems, so that they present me with visibility and transparency into how my features are doing in the pipeline. I care about builds, I care about releases, of course, but I really care about the features, because once I have a critical mass of features, I can call that a release, and I can have a, I can market that, I can do all kinds of interesting things around that, and of course the business cares about it at that level for sure. But as
absolutely,
as technology people, I think what we're starting to be able to do now, which is kind of exciting, is focus on features instead of focusing just on builds or on these huge releases.
I mean, so the feature is the Goldilocks unit, if you will, right?
That's kind of the argument I'm making, and I think, if you look at what's happening, especially in the area of things like feature flags, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there where
certainly is.
You can get to the point where, well, if I want to turn something off because it's broken, I don't have to redeploy to turn it off. I flip a runtime flag, or conversely, I flip a runtime flag to turn a feature on, or maybe expose the feature to a few, to 1% or 5% or a certain region or a very important customer or something like that. So that kind of control into the runtime of an application, I think that's going to be a bigger game changer, I think, than we're giving ourselves credit for in terms of where feature flags is going to take us. And then on top of that, getting all of the data that the various tool chains that we use, all the way from kind of IDEs all the way through to when we're in production and monitoring and the security and all of the things that we do along, getting all of that data into a place where we can ask questions that span those data sets, because that's one of the really difficult things now. And that's something that engineering managers and product managers and people spend an enormous amount of time hunting data to either kind of support their point of view about a decision that needs to be made, or maybe refutes a point of view about a decision gets made. But you've got to, if you talk to product managers and engineering managers, it's kind of a nightmare. I've got to spend an hour in my issue tracking tool, and then I've got to spend an hour in my CI tool, and then I can start to form a theory about what's going on. And I think what we're working on now in the industry, and certainly stuff that we're working on at Cloudbees, we're trying to bring all that data to the surface more. Right, so that you can kind of democratize the process, if you will, of asking those questions. Although I guess democratize is a pretty heavy word to use these days.
Yeah, it is. Let's not. No politics, Anders. Yeah, no, I do. I absolutely know what you mean.
The idea is, if you have the person who goes and does the spelunking for that data, they're really the only person who has that data internalized. And if you can surface and make that data transparent, and available to everyone, then a lot of people can look at that data and start to draw conclusions and those sorts of things. And I think that's a good thing. So I think, to get to the point where we leverage the fact that we are good at CI, we leverage the fact that we got better at doing releases. I seem to not want to say that we're good at releases, because I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think we're now at an inflection point where we can start to think about managing features at an individual level, even once they're in production. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's something that we'll see a lot of interesting innovation happening in the tooling space for that, and I think we'll see some surprising things come along, as a result of having more access to that kind of data and being able to sort of shepherd things through in a much more individualized way. It's like if you're at the airport and somehow, for whatever reason, you're important enough that you get an escort that takes you through the security line and takes you down to the gate and boards you on the plane, right? Not an experience I've ever had.
They call it clear.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's that sort of thing, right? It's the idea is that we're going to clear a path for you to get a feature out as quickly as possible, and that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean borrowing resources from another feature. It could mean don't merge that pull request right now because we don't want to destabilize this area. I mean, it can mean a lot of different things, but ultimately what it means is that you have more and better control of the things that are making it out the door and into customers' hands. And that's what any business wants, right? Is the ability to treat all of those things as kind of fungible, poker chips, if you will, that you can sort of, put out there and use. Whereas now, as you know, in the kind of the monolith world and the huge honking, kind of waterfall release world, it was like, well, if I want this feature, I also have to take these other 12 features. And by the way, 9 of those 12 features are going to cause this feature to be 3 months late because it's sitting there waiting to be released, right? As we start to,
or not a fully functional version. That feature wasn't really what we envisioned it was going to be. Yeah. I've had that happen to me too.
Right, and one of the reasons why maybe it isn't what we envisioned it to be is because we couldn't, we had a choice of exposing that feature to everyone or no one. Right.
Yep.
And whereas when you start to do things like feature flags and traffic steering and all of those sorts of things, canary releases and all of that, you start to be able to run experiments, and that allows you to make big improvements on features before you unleash them on the whole world. So I think it's trying to kind of start that conversation of, I think we're at a point where we can start to look at this problem slightly differently. And look for tooling and look for processes and look for ways that we can get really good at that, because ideally what you really want in the world is you kind of stack rank all the things that you might be able to do, order them by the order of importance, and then you kind of knock them off one by one, kind of, your traditional kind of burn down scenario.
Sure.
But as we all know, stack ranking and sorting the list is one thing, then actually being able to complete them in order without getting stuck somewhere, and then you get stuck on one thing and you're like, well, all right, we'll abandon that, we'll move on to the next one. Getting more control over those kinds of processes and more visibility into that. Even if it's just stuff like, well, you know what, the last time we touched that area of the product, we found a whole bunch of third-party problems. So let's pad that schedule a little bit, because we know there are known unknowns out in that minefield that we need to navigate. So as you get more data and as more people are exposed to that data, I think it's going to start to, make us a little bit more, agile. That's terrible use of that phrase in this context, but a little bit more nimble in the way that we get stuff out the door. And to me, that's interesting and exciting, because continuous delivery, DevOps, continuous testing, DevSecOps, all of these things are awesome, but they're not the end of history. They're not like, once we get really good at that, we stop improving.
No. They're just the process, not the end.
Exactly.
No one ever told you about the journey, right? It's not the destination, it's the journey. Those are journey things. But, Anders, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm thinking to myself, Mick Kirsten, who I'm sure you know Mick, Dr. Mick Kirsten of TaskTop, founder, CEO of TaskTop. He wrote a book, I guess it's 2 years, maybe it's more than 2 years now, Project to Product, right?
Yep.
And it was really about asking us to kind of change our focus from a project focus to a product focus, right? So instead of thinking about a project, think about the product we're building. To me, this is in that same vein. Instead of thinking about how many builds I'm going to do, how many releases I'm going to do, right? How many lines of code I'm going to commit, and somehow judging whether or not we're a high-performing IT team, to keep it, in that kind of analogy. Based on that, we are doing it on what's really important, which is a very fundamental, a feature, the feature that the customer gives a crap about, and therefore we do. I think there's a book in your future there, man.
Well, that's scary, but to me, it's a little bit of a, and I wouldn't want to sort of put words in Mick's mouth, as it were, but to me, it's kind of a logical extension of that sort of thought, right?
Yeah.
Which is, instead of looking at software as, okay, what are the disciplines that we need to apply to it? We need the DBA function, we need the coder function, we need the QA function. And in case you can't tell, when I'm saying function, what I really mean is silo. And one of the things that Mick talks about is kind of, let's focus on the product. Let's focus on solving that problem and building, strong teams around that, and building things that have some continuity to them. And, as if you've ever worked in an environment or worked with an environment where it's very project based and people get pulled off all the time to work on other things, and and this is only a small part of obviously what Mick talks about, but where there's kind of no continuity and no continuous shepherding of things. I think it's kind of a logical extension to say, well, then, okay, once we have our product, what, if that's the big molecule, what are the smaller molecules or the atoms inside a product? Well, it's features, and I'm using features as a generic term for a bug fix or a new. Feature is a generic term. You're not misusing the term. Yeah.
Excellent stuff.
I want to be careful, but
no, I got you.
I think that's where we're getting to, and to me that's cool and that's exciting, because it's new and it's different, and there's obviously a lot of folks doing this on the bleeding edge already, in terms of feature flagging and experiments and those kinds of things.
Well, feature flag, yeah, they're all the canary stuff, the feature flagging, the A/B stuff we're seeing, and that it really is changing the way we look at how to, the release isn't the be all and end all. It's almost the start of just the next cycle, which is, it's not that big old cycle we used to do.
Exactly. And I think, it's funny, one of the things I had to learn when I was first coming out of college and starting my career in software was, when you come out of school, you have this mentality that you only have one chance, you only have one shot, right? You only take the test once, you only turn in the paper or the problem set once, and it's as good as it's ever going to be when you hand it over. And that's a mindset that you have to get out of when you get into the industry, right? Because the whole idea of MVP, right? The idea is
it's continuous improvement, man.
Yeah, you're going to get a second shot at it, right? But the thing there is, if you don't think of your features as things that live on past a release, you often get into a scenario where what you end up doing is you cram in as much as you think is the MVP for a particular feature, and you throw it out there, and then it's done. And that's the last time you ever revisit it, which I think it's always sad when that happens to software, because what you really need to do is iterate. And if you only get one turn at the crank because you finish phase one of a feature, and then of course you never get to phase 2 or 3, that's kind of sad. And so I think looking at things from the perspective of a feature, and that a feature has a life beyond the release, right? If you're going to get it right, and if you can improve it over time and add value, and there's a reason that handcrafted things are so good and so valuable, because somebody has spent a lot of time honing that,
Absolutely, man.
And sometimes sometimes you have the flash of inspiration where you create something magical in 5 minutes, but usually it's just a lot of perspiration and less inspiration. Kind of paraphrasing Edison there a little bit. And you just have to turn the crank as much as you can till you get things right, till you get enough feedback and information. And if you could do that at kind of pick and choose where you do that at a level that's above the level of builds and below the level of releases, then you're in a good spot. So that's something that I always look for when I talk to a new organization that I don't know, or a group of customers or something. That's always something that I'm interested in learning, is kind of, what is their process for deciding what goes into a release, what gets pulled out, how do they manage, changing scope in a release, and those sorts of things, because that always happens. That's to me, that's a fascinating conversation to have, because it starts to level set you a little bit in terms of how they think about that problem. So anyway, just some noodling that I've been doing while I'm sitting at home.
No, it got me thinking. We'll
in our code base.
I hear you. We'll talk more about it. But Anders, we're out of time though. I got to run. Hey, thanks for sharing this with us. We'll talk. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. We'll have you back on TechStrong soon.
My pleasure. Always fun to talk to you.
All right. Anders Walgren at Cloudbees here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue, or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Our next segment today is from the Something Old archives. It's actually not that old. It's from TechStrong Con, which was just 2 weeks ago. And it features my friend Derek Weeks, VP over at Sonotype. Of course, Derek and Mark Miller are the folks behind All Day Devops. Derek's also been doing the community, DevSecOps community survey for 5 or 6 years now. Anyway, Derek gave a really great presentation over at TechStrong Con, and it was called Machines Making Software, Paving and Maintaining the Road with Zero Trust Open Source. Look, Derek has a great presentation style. I think you're going to enjoy it. Let's now go to our presentation with Derek Weeks of Sonotype.
Hey everyone, I'm Derek Weeks. I am Vice President at Sonotype and also the co-founder of All Day Devops. I'm super excited to talk to you today about some research I've been doing over the last number of years, 6 or 7 years now, around open source supply chains, DevSecOps, and some of the data-driven look we have at these topics. So with that, why don't we kick this off and sit back for a great story. So an organization's journey to excellence begins once it ceases to sacrifice quality for speed. But, you know, we're at a DevOps conference. It's all about speed, right? I mean, we've listened to Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble and Gene Kim and read the State of DevOps reports and all the DORA reports. And we know that the best organizations out there, the peak performers, are deploying 46 times faster than others. They're more profitable. They have higher market share. They have 7 times lower change failure rates in their organizations. And they have 2,600 times faster time to recover within those organizations. They're also 1.7 times more likely to extensively use open source within their environments. And in fact, you know, each year I go out and run the DevSecOps community survey. We're in our 7th year of running that survey now. And one of the things that we see year after year, and you perhaps see this in your own organization, there are many organizations that are deploying faster and faster. 47% of the folks in our survey last year were deploying multiple times a week within their environments. But the important thing about this is it's an internal benchmark of speed. And I'm going to get back to that because it's going to be an important part of the conversation here. So we obviously know from the State of DevOps report and DORA and everyone else that faster is better in the enterprise. But as I said, if you look at fast as an internal benchmark, you may be missing the key point. When in 2017, Jeff Bezos issued a letter to his shareholders in their annual report. And as part of that letter, he said, beware of the proxies. Beware of the proxies really, you know, to him in that circumstance was if you focus so much on processes and we're getting faster, we're, you know, at Amazon, we're able to ship products faster, get more products in inventory, perhaps spin up AWS cloud environments faster than anyone else. You may miss something out there that's the bigger context of what makes the business hum. So that beware of the proxies is really important when we think about DevSecOps, because part of it is you could get faster at automating security practices within DevOps, but you have to understand your adversaries are doing the same thing. And we know from looking at adversaries that they are getting faster, and the better adversaries are the fastest ones. If we look back to 2018 in the Equifax breach, there was a vulnerability in an open source component, Struts, that Equifax was using. It was aware of this vulnerability and updated some of their Struts instances, but not all of them. And within 3 days, Equifax was breached by their adversary or the hackers. But on those same days, Canada Revenue, Canada Statistics, GMO Payment Gateway, and within a couple of days, Okinawa Power and Japanese Post were also breached through the same vulnerability. The adversaries were moving on Equifax as well as others within a 3-day period. In our DevSecOps community survey this year, we've asked people, have you had or experienced an open source related breach in the past 12 months? And the overall responses within those organizations showed us 21%, or 1 in 5 organizations had an open source related breach in the past 12 months. But interestingly, the most mature organizations represented in this survey, those that had multiple attributes of mature DevOps practices, including that they were using a software bill of materials, 28% of those experienced a breach. And that's probably because they were more aware of the breach than those in less mature DevOps practices. So the key thing when we think about these open source related breaches is this challenge that we have, that not only do we want to automate ourselves and automate our practices and collaborate with security more and push security earlier in the development lifecycle to improve our own practices from an internal benchmark, but we need to look at this external benchmark of how fast are the adversaries. Between 2006 and 2017, when the time between a vulnerability being announced and the exploits appearing in the wild decreased from 45 days to 3 days, your adversaries are getting much, much faster. And when it comes to open source related issues, there are a number of that have come up in the news overall that we've been tracking as part of the research that I've been doing. And I'll go back to July 2017. Stealing credentials. When we look at a story that broke in the news, 79,000 packages within the NPM repository had their credentials stolen. This means that hackers or adversaries could break into those open source components or open source projects, inject malicious code, make changes or create backdoors in those codes because they had the credentials to be able to log in and do that. We saw instances of malicious code injection in November 2018 with EventStream. That was a project that had an adversary come in, inject malicious code into it. That code was then downloaded from the NPM repositories 2 million times a week. The target of this particular attack happened to be Copay, which is a cryptocurrency wallet, where the adversary knew that they were using that open source project and wanted to take advantage of stealing money from the customers using those wallets. We also see other types of attacks on these open source components and software supply chains. Just last month, April 2020, we saw over 700 Ruby Gems packages that were typo squatted on the Ruby Gems repository. Typo squatting means that we're taking a particular component and we are creating a new version of it, but just with a slightly different name. So instead of the Billy Bob component with 1 B, maybe it has 2 Bs listed in it. A project called Color may be COLOR, or the typo squatted version may be COLOUR. So common misspellings or typos related to packages is also on the rise, where these malicious packages are being inserted into these repositories that are downloaded through software supply chains. And again, this is going to tie to a lot of the research that I'm going to share with you as we go through this presentation. So just this month, May 2020, we have seen another instance of open source related breaches come through SaltStack. So SaltStack is a common open source component. It is sometimes deployed into production or internet facing environments. There was a vulnerability known in this particular component. SaltStack is a project and a company created newer, safer versions of those components. When the vulnerabilities were disclosed to them, they made proper disclosure announcements to all of their customers. But those that didn't update after the vulnerabilities had been publicly announced, that didn't update to the safer versions, within 3 to 5 days, there were 5 breaches known to be attributed to organizations that didn't know that they were using vulnerable versions of SaltStack, the versions that had become vulnerable and didn't upgrade or update those components before adversaries could take advantage of their infrastructure. The guys at F-Secure that found this particular vulnerability, when asked about it, said, this is a situation where it's really patched by Friday or be compromised by Monday. This is the, it plays into, not only are all of us using a bunch of open source components that we're sourcing through our software supply chains, but we need to be aware of when there are changes in these, how fast our adversaries are in attacking us against those vulnerabilities or trying to exploit those. Through the work that I've done in the software supply chain report over the last 6 years, we've tracked over 25 different instances of typo squatting, credentials being stolen, malicious code injection, et cetera, that are tied to these. Now, this is actually, this kind of background on studying software supply chains and cybersecurity and DevSecOps is what led to an intersection of myself and others at Sonotype, where I work, with Gene Kim and Dr. Stephen McGill in 2018, where we saw these patterns emerging in the market or emerging in the ecosystem in the open source community of vulnerable components, vulnerabilities being exploited, DevOps teams moving faster and wanting to operate at higher velocity because there were better business outcomes associated with that. So we've partnered for the last 2 years on creating and releasing the research on an annual basis in the State of the Software Supply Chain report. This is a report I've actually championed for the last 6 years, but as I said, in the past 2 years, partnering with Gene Kim and Stephen McGill to bring even more academic rigor to the supply chain report itself, and to really shed light on these and other problems with the open source ecosystem that are directly tied to DevOps practices out in the market. So I've mentioned software supply chains a couple of times. And I want to, before I get too far into this, I'll take a step back for those that aren't familiar with software supply chains. All of you in your organizations that are developing software have a software supply chain. In this particular case, we look at it from a standpoint of open source projects. There are open source projects out there developing code that's made freely available to you and your organizations. Those projects as suppliers put their code into warehouses like Maven Central, npm.js, rubygems.org, the PyPy repository, et cetera. And it's downloaded by you and your software development teams as the manufacturers using those component parts to produce finished goods. If you think about containers, they also represent a software supply chain or your use of a software supply chain. I create a container as a supplier. I put it into Docker Hub as a warehouse. Your operations team downloads that container and puts it into your production environment. That's also a software supply chain. All of you are using them, and you're using them at volumes and demand levels that are astronomical. Let's look at some of that just to better quantify it. Now, at Sonotype, we happen to run the Maven Central repository for all the Java open source components out there. We track the number of download requests year over year within this repository. And just last year in 2019, we saw 226 billion download requests from the Maven Central repository. Now, to put it in context, there are only about 10 million Java developers in the world that would be requesting or downloading these components from the Maven Central repository. But it's not just Maven Central. If you look at the stats on npm.js or the npm repository, just recently acquired by GitHub, they publish stats all the time. In last month, in April, they had 84 billion package downloads. If you annualize that is double the number of monthly downloads they had a year ago. If you annualize this, there are 1 trillion NPM packages downloaded every year at this volume. There is a massive consumption of free open source packages, because why would you ever want to code from scratch what you could download from the internet in a second? Now, what this really means is that of the code that you're developing, it is often 85 to 95% of an application you're building today is created from these open source components. And within your organization, if you were just developing on Java alone, I looked at 15,000 different organizations and analyzed for the software supply chain report and analyzed their consumption patterns. In these organizations, the average organization was downloading over 300,000 packages from 2,700 different open source suppliers. Of those suppliers, they were consuming 8,200 different versions of parts or open source components from those suppliers. They're just downloading those parts a massive number of times. If we look at the JavaScript development practices, there are about 10.5 million JavaScript developers around the world now. Based on 1 trillion downloads a year that they are targeting at current download volumes, that would mean every single JavaScript developer you have on staff is downloading over 93,000 JavaScript packages every year, right? Now, the good news is this is making us all faster. We don't have to code from scratch anymore. We can download from the internet in seconds these components. It's playing, the use of open source is playing into some of the DevOps outcomes that we have of deploying value faster to our customers by taking advantage of this open source. But not all of these open source components are created equally. As you've seen in this slide, in the last slide, not all these components are created equally. 51% of the NPM packages audited by NPM themselves had known security vulnerabilities. In the previous slide, about 10% of those Java components that were downloaded had known vulnerabilities. So we know that faster is better in the enterprise, but when we're reliant on so many different open source projects for the code that we are building with and deploying and delivering to our customers, we want to know, and we wanted to know in last year's research report, is faster better in open source? And how do we pick the very best suppliers? If we're going to work with 2,800 different Java external suppliers for our code, how do we pick the best ones? Well, they're really, and when we think about measuring, you know, faster is better in the enterprise, is it faster better in open source? These are kind of two different worlds. You know, enterprise has multiple deploys a day. Open source has versioned releases. Enterprises usually has consistent sized development teams that are well resourced. Open source projects are more fluid. Resources are more variable. But there are similar metrics that we could also use to compare these two different worlds. One is deployment frequency. It's similar to release frequency for these projects. Organizational performance ties in open source often to the popularity of projects. Mean time to restore in the enterprise could also be tied to things like time to remediate vulnerabilities that might appear within these open source components and projects. So when we started the research, we wanted to look at, you know, similarities in these groups and look at deployment frequency and popularity overall within these projects. So to do this, we needed a set of open source components to rely upon. And as I mentioned before, at Sonotype, we happen to run and operate the Maven Central repository, which has about 5 million open source component versions in it or component releases in it. And we wanted to look across a broad set of these open source projects. We started with, we needed projects that had released multiple times over a 5-year period, followed a standard versioning practice, sometimes had known security vulnerabilities that had been updated, had more than one dependency on them, et cetera. And we came up with a group of 36,000 open source projects with a history of 5 years of deploying new versions of projects to the environment. And that was the set that we went against evaluating for this, this research. And we looked at a number of different attributes across these projects, from their popularity, the size of their development teams, their development speed, release frequency, were they using continuous integration platforms, what were their security update patterns, and so forth. As we looked at these practices and delved into the research, we had a couple of hypotheses that we went into, and I'm going to cover 4 here within this discussion. The first hypothesis is that projects that release frequently have better outcomes. This is kind of tied to the DORA or State of DevOps report showing enterprises that release frequently have better outcomes, which the DORA and State of DevOps reports have shown. Now, what we saw within these 36,000 open source projects was that we were able to validate this hypothesis. The projects that did release frequently had better outcomes. They were generally 5 times more popular. They attracted 79% more developers, and they were also more likely to be foundation supported within those environments. Now, we also wanted to look at, or we had another hypothesis of projects that update dependencies frequently were more secure. So if there was a known security vulnerability within a project, that's not good. We wanted to look at suppliers that had something not good happen where a vulnerability was found, and then they quickly updated, indicating a good track record and a good supplier that you could rely upon. Well, to do this, it wasn't necessarily straightforward research, so let me walk you through a little bit of how we approached it. First, we wanted to look at these 36,000 projects and take 3 key metrics into account. One is the time to remediate. So if there was a vulnerability, how long did it take them to fix that particular problem? In general, how long did they take to update? So how often were they releasing new versions of those projects, regardless of if there was a vulnerability or not? And then did they have any stale dependencies? So were they leaving dependencies behind or not updating to every new version of a dependency when it was coming out? To help you visualize this a little, there's just a quick picture that I'll share with you. Imagine an open source project, Project C, and that's on version 2.2. C has 2 vulnerabilities associated with it. Component A, 2.2, and B, 2.2. Those are the dependencies. Now, over time, we can see the behavior of C and its dependencies, A and B. In this particular scenario, B has a vulnerability discovered in it. When B has a vulnerability in it, we want to look at when did B update, let's say to version 2.3, and remediate that vulnerability. So when B does that, it fixes that vulnerability. But until C 2.3 adopts that version of B 2.3, C remains vulnerable. So in this case, you see when C 2.3 comes out, it's adopted B 2.3 and therefore eliminated that vulnerability. And in the time that that's happened, A has moved from 2.2 to 2.3 to 2.4, and C adopts version 2.4 of A. But 2.3 of A was skipped. That is a stale dependency. So we were measuring all of these patterns across these 36,000 open source projects to come up with what were the the outcomes, or what did we see in terms of their speed to remediate any vulnerabilities in these environments. So what we saw is the mean time to remediate a vulnerability that appears in an open source project or one of its dependencies was almost a year. It was 326 days on average. The median time was 180 days, so just about 6 months. So this is somewhat startling if you're relying on projects, and these projects as suppliers to you have vulnerabilities found in them, and yet you might wait a year between the time the vulnerability is discovered and the time the project provides a new update of its component. In the case of SALT that I just mentioned a little while ago, or struts, those projects had known vulnerabilities and they updated them quickly. So the point between a vulnerability appearing and the new version available that fixed that was the same day. The same day the vulnerability was announced was the day that the safe package was released. But on average, that time is 326 days across this population of projects. So what we wanted to find out was, who were these projects that were updating the fastest? Like I mentioned, struts or salt stack were in this category of vulnerabilities appearing and remediation appearing also quickly. But we knew within these projects that not every open source project that we were looking at had a vulnerability that had been discovered with it. So we wanted to look at the overall update time within the projects and see how that compared to the time to remediate. Well, what we found was there was a high correlation between the median time to remediate and the median time to update for these projects. As you can see between the blue and the green lines, this strong correlation appears. And what we also knew from this is that the projects that stay secure are also the projects that update frequently. So hypothesis 2 was also validated through this research. Projects that update their dependencies more frequently are generally staying more secure. So when you look at this pattern back here, these are the projects, even if you weren't tracking known security vulnerabilities in projects, if you just picked projects that were updating frequently, you could actually go to the projects or use the projects that were generally staying more secure. So when you look at what quality or high quality suppliers would we go with, we would go with those that updated frequently. Now, we had another hypothesis within our research. Projects with fewer dependencies would stay more up to date. So clearly, if you're project C with dependencies A and B, just having 2 dependencies makes it much easier to stay up to date. It seemed like a relatively good hypothesis to start with. But what we found out in this research was that larger development teams in general had more dependencies and were much more effective at staying up to date. They were releasing more frequently as larger development teams, and the more dependencies they had, the larger the development teams were, the more frequently they were developing. And it was kind of funny when we thought about the size of these teams. A 4-person team could consume 1 pizza. The 4 to 6 person team in general was a 2 pizza team. And we've always kind of heard that 2 pizza teams are optimal size. And in this case, it was just kind of a funny relationship that we noted in our research, but only for the fun of it. So hypothesis 3 was rejected in this case. Projects with fewer dependencies were not great at staying up to date. So we want to look at, when we're picking the best suppliers, components that actually have more, or projects that have more dependencies will generally have a better median time to update. Now, my favorite hypothesis in this entire set is hypothesis 4. That is that the most popular projects are the best at staying up to date. we often use, and in general across the open source community, we use popularity as a good starting attribute for why would we pick any open source project out there. Well, all my friends use it, I know it, I hear about it all the time, maybe I should use it. And that is often an ideal situation in which to pick components. We wanted to understand if that was true or not. And part of it, if you look back to 1999, Eric Raymond, author of The Cathedral and the Bazaar, coined the term, coined the term that's been used countless times since. Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. The more popular these open source components are, the more eyeballs there would be on them, the better that they would be, and also the safer they would be, the fewer vulnerabilities they would have. So within our research, we were able to look at these 36,000 projects and come up with different behavioral clusters. And there were kind of 5 key clusters that popped out or grouped themselves together. The small exemplars and the large exemplars. These were both small and large development teams, but they had exemplary mean time to updates. These were the fastest projects, in projects in general that had the fastest update times. There were also the laggards within this group. They had poor median time to updates. They had very high stale dependency counts. They were more likely to be commercially supported projects. There was also a group of features first. So these were groups that released frequently, offered new features frequently, but the time to update for vulnerabilities coming in or remediation coming in wasn't always the highest priority. So they might be releasing often with new features, but not remediating those vulnerabilities. And then there was the cautious group. This is the group that's staying slightly behind, maybe not on the latest version of their dependencies, but maybe just 1 or 2 versions back. So not bad, but that also was a group that we identified in the research. Now, what we saw in this grouping or this clustering was this terrifically brilliant, beautiful pattern within this cluster diagram. And what you see here, the dark blue and the green dots, all kind of centered toward the left side here. And the left side represents those that are releasing frequently. So the release frequency was a matter of days or a couple of months between releases. And the higher they are on this chart, the more popular they are. So you can see that these projects are generally releasing quickly and they are quite popular. But not all of the projects represented by dots on this chart that are popular are also releasing frequently. So if you think about this or look at this environment where you have some of the laggards in here that are very popular but not updating quickly, if you think about the choice of suppliers that you have of open source components out there, and you think about the suppliers with the best track records, with the best quality parts, updating frequently, and so forth, you actually want to pick from these suppliers, not these suppliers. So popularity alone is not a great attribute to use when selecting open source components. It has to be popularity, update frequency, and other elements. So hypothesis number 4 was rejected. More popular projects will not necessarily be great about staying up to date. There are plenty of very popular components with poor median time to update. So as we were doing this research, the one thing that we wanted to figure out was while faster is better in the enterprise, and we see that faster is better in open source projects, we wanted to know, well, what are development teams doing? Not just the development teams that are building open source projects and open source code, but the development teams that are consuming these open source components, the JavaScript developers pulling in over 90,000 components a year, the Java development organizations downloading 300,000 components a year. Are there practices in the enterprise that we can measure? So what we did, we went out and surveyed over 650 developers and asked them about their dependency management practices and their use of open source components. And we asked them, you know, are you striving to use the latest versions? Are you scheduling regular updates? Is there a process in which you add a new component or dependency within your environment? Are you proactively removing troublesome components within your environments? And do you have automated tools in place when it comes to tracking and managing these components across your infrastructure? So what the findings here, I think were surprising to us for a number of reasons. One is the numbers are really high. We were expecting kind of 10, 12%-ish 12%-ish kinds of numbers across the board. And I think what we have here is maybe more aspirational than empirical. But regardless, it shows that there's a certain awareness of using components and updating those components within the enterprises. Now, what we saw was there were some patterns that were emerging within this use of open source components. That there were exemplars and laggards within these groups in the enterprise. The exemplars, those that were scheduling updates frequently, they were 10 times more likely to have scheduling in place. They were 11 times more likely to have a process in place to add a dependency. They were 12 times more likely to have automation in place to help them. And when the exemplars had these things in place, they were also almost 3 times more likely to consider updating these components or less likely to consider updating these components as a painful exercise. When you think about updating components or dependencies, their dependencies to the latest versions, it sounds like a lot of effort. When you climb the mountain every day, when you're doing this work every day, when it's a regular part of your process, it becomes easier and there's much less pain, you know, almost 3 times less pain identified by going through these practices. And I think that's what we see in normal DevOps practices too. If you're releasing once a year or twice a year, that's a painful experience because of what you have to go through with updates and bug fixes and patches, etc. But if you're releasing every day and you can fix things quickly, if you release quickly and can fix quickly when there are problems, it becomes a lot easier and less painful, and work becomes more enjoyable, right? So, so we were seeing similar patterns emerge within the development teams as well. So you all might remember back in 2010 when Jez Humble and Dave Farley wrote Continuous Delivery, which is still an incredible book today. And part of what they mentioned, and also reflective of what Deming wrote decades ago, was this need to build quality in, to build security in, to not just move fast, but move, if you're going to produce things or manufacture things or build things at a high velocity, that quality matters. And when we look further into the use of open source components within development teams, one of the things that we found, we looked across 68,000 applications to identify what open source components they were using. And in this particular case, how old those components were. And in the 2019 State of the Software Supply Chain report, what we saw was that about half of the components being used in these applications, just a tiny bit more than half, were created in the last 3 years. The other half of the components were quite old. They were many versions back, or were just old components that maybe didn't even have newer versions. Now, you can use parts of any age, but remember, when we're talking about building high quality applications with the best quality projects, those that update frequently are the highest quality. And if you're not using the most updated released parts, you're using older parts, you're not relying on the best parts out there. Now, another way that this gets quantified is when we look across that same population of open source components, and we look at the percent of vulnerabilities found within these components, we see that those components that are 3 years old or younger have significantly fewer known security vulnerabilities in them. In fact, 65% fewer known vulnerabilities. Whereas the average number of vulnerable components in the population from in the 50% of the components that are more than 3 years old, the average vulnerability rates are 15%. More vulnerabilities have been discovered within those components in that infrastructure. So part of what you may be asking is, well, how do I know what components I'm using, and how do I track those, or even trace those, or identify those over time? And you might have heard about a software bill of materials. This is conversations, many conversations across the industry and across government about keeping a software bill of materials. Do I know what open source components that I'm using? If 85 to 95% of the application I'm building today is based on these open source component parts, am I keeping an inventory of those parts made available to me? Now, when we went out and surveyed these 5,000 developers earlier this year and asked them, does your organization keep a full software bill of materials? In the most mature DevOps practices, 45% of those organizations said they're keeping a full software bill of materials. 26% in immature organizations are keeping a full software bill of materials. Well, this is, if you remember back to the beginning of the presentation, we talked about this salt stack vulnerability that had been announced at the beginning of May. There's a known vulnerability in salt stack. There is a new version that the salt stack project and company have made available of that component. If you know what components you're using and can update them, you're in good shape. A software bill of materials helps you answer the questions that you need to know when vulnerabilities are disclosed. The first question that you need to ask is, did we ever use that component? Did we ever use salt stack? A software bill of materials, if you're keeping one, would tell you, yes, we have, and here are the applications where it's being used. So it tells you that you've used it and where that might be. That's the value of a software bill of materials within these practices. But you can see even in the most mature practices, fewer than half are actually using or applying a software bill of materials. You could also say, well, we have processes within our environment that allow us to track what open source we're using. Are the open source components approved or not? And we ask within these the same DevSecOps community survey, one, do you have an open source policy? And two, do you follow that open source policy? In the most mature practices, what we saw was 69% had an open source policy and followed it. So they know what they're using. They know if what they're using is good or not based upon their compliance or governance rules. And their people are following those rules. Now, still in those practices, 31% in mature DevOps practices either don't have a policy or they're not following that policy, which says it's kind of a free-for-all in what you can use within those environments. And even worse so in immature DevOps practices, only 50% of developers in those organizations said, we have a policy that I'm aware of and I follow it, versus the other 50% that said, I'm not sure if we have a policy, or if we do, I don't follow it. So one of the other things that was really interesting that came out of the DevSecOps community survey this year was we asked people, how are you informed of application security issues? And this comes in a lot of different ways, and you can see across this: tooling, security teams, emails, chat, through the media, our customers inform us, even rumor for some people is informing them of AppSec issues. But when we look at the more mature practices, which in the survey we showed a high correlation between high maturity DevOps practices and happy developers. You'll have to read that survey to find more. But you can see this strong position of they're using more tooling and security teams to inform them of AppSec issues. In this scenario, if you look at what are the most mature DevOps practices and teams doing and how are they reliant upon one another, the more mature practices and also happy developers have more tooling informing them of AppSec issues. This is making them more efficient and productive in terms of their development practices and building quality in and building security in. But a lot of people, and we see this pattern again, and maybe to some it's an anti-pattern of, hey, if we're doing DevSecOps really well, we don't need security as a team. We don't need to work with them. We can kind of do it all ourselves. And what we see in the most mature practices is not only is security present as an information channel, but it's even more present. That the collaboration rates with security teams are even higher in mature DevOps practices than in immature or in organizations with no DevOps practices. Security becomes more ingrained in the conversations, in the collaboration, in the teams as a practice, working with their development peers. So what does this all mean at the end of the day for securing software supply chains? Those organizations that had a managed software supply chain that we showed in our State of the Software Supply Chain report reduced the percent of vulnerable components used in production applications by 55%. Managed software supply chains made a difference. People knew what they were using. They knew if they were using high quality parts. They knew if there were vulnerabilities in those parts. They're reliant on more high quality software providers within the open source project community. And the quality that they're therefore building in is significantly greater within those environments. So part of the cool thing about all of this research is how it comes together to help us use information like this to feed into our DevOps practices and DevSecOps practices to build quality in. Using this kind of information and these attributes to help us continue to build quality in at insane speeds. Imagine using this information not only to build quality in and build security in, but to be faster than your adversaries, to be able to update open source components that you have faster than 3 days, because the velocity, the normal build velocity that you have enables that while building those security practices and fast feedback loops in so that you can stay ahead of those adversaries. Imagine that secure development is just a standard practice for your organization. And the kind of cool or interesting thing about this, if you think further down the line, is if we know what the best components are, and we know the attributes of those components and the best projects out there, and 85 to 95 and a growing percent of components, a growing percentage of components that make up an application that I'm building today is increasing. I can actually feed those attributes and requirements to machines that can then build the software for me. Now, any of you developing software today, your job is not at risk of machines now building software with these open source components, but your kids that may be studying software development, their careers may have a different outcome associated with this kind of data, how we apply the research and how we improve the quality of DevSecOps practices overall. So with that, I want to conclude with, if you found this information interesting, if you'd like a copy of the State of the Software Supply Chain report, I'm going to have my out-of-office email on today. It's at weeks@sonotype.com. You can just email me. I'll just have my auto reply going. It will provide a link to the report itself. I'll also throw in a link there to the DevSecOps community survey this year so that you can see that data. And I'll attach the slides as well so that if you want to download those or share them, you can go forth. As you've seen throughout the presentation, my Twitter handle is Weeks Tweets. Feel free to share information there, tweet me there, connect with me there, or on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you very much for your time today. I enjoyed presenting at the TechStrong conference, and I will look forward to seeing you out there soon. Thank you very much.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Wow, I hope you enjoyed Derek's presentation from TechStrong Con. You know, all of the presentations are still up there if you go over to TechStrongCon.com, and you'll be able to watch them at your leisure. Of course, they're not live. You can't do live Q&A with the speakers, but you can certainly see all the presentations as well as the exhibits and everything else that was up there. For now, though, let's head over to our headline news today for what's happening on Security Boulevard, Devops.com, and Container Journal. Excuse me. We'll start with Container Journal. On Container Journal, we have Zerto extends data protection reach. So some news from our friends at Zerto. Over on Devops.com, we have why DevOps and federal agencies need each other. You know, the federal government, which at times was kind of lagging in DevOps adoption, but in other areas was leading in DevOps adoption, needs DevOps now more than ever. And there are some unique opportunities for private sector tech companies to build some recession resilience now by working with the government, because recession or not, the government, well, they actually print the money. But no, the government always has their budgets, and they have programs and services they need to deliver regardless of the economy. So, I've helped found companies that had large federal government components, and I can attest to that. Also up on DevOps.com today, though, we have the folks at Eggplant infuses testing with AI. And we're seeing more and more around AI ML with testing. And then we have DataStax brings AI ops to Cassandra. Kind of speaks for itself, but you can see what's new at the folks at DataStax. Over on Security Boulevard, we have COVID-19's impact on online privacy, cybersecurity, and state regulations, both in California and New York. This was a panel discussion that was held on June 11th, and our own Soom Paremba is the author of this article. Some good stuff there. I highly recommend you check it out. And then also using zero trust to erase using zero trust to ease compliance. I'm not a fan of doing compliance for compliance sake alone. You do compliance because it's part of your cybersecurity strategy. But zero trust is something that certainly helps as part of anyone's cybersecurity strategy today. And if you do it right, it should ease your compliance burdens as well. So check both of those out. Good stuff on Security Boulevard. As I always caveat, there's a ton of stuff up on the website. Go check them out on Security Boulevard, Devops.com, Container Journal. There's something for everyone there, and we hope you enjoy. Now, though, let's turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene has two good guests today to talk to, and then she's going to give a webinar preview. So we'll be back with her. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, welcome back everybody to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I am here today with two gentlemen who are going to be talking about automated cloud governance. We have from Concourse Labs, we have Don Duet, who is the CEO and co-founder, and Scott Crenshaw, who is the president of Concourse Labs. Hey, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us, Charlene. We're excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I know you guys just came out of stealth, and you raised about 15 million or so.
That's right. We raised $15.2 million led by Forge Point Capital, and also participating were our existing investors, Capri Ventures and 83 North.
Excellent. So why don't you tell me a little bit about Concourse Labs? What are you guys all about?
Yeah, so we help companies embrace the consumption of cloud in a way that really supports their ability to run at scale, to take a lot of the different forms of controls and rules that they often today are managing either with people or in spreadsheets, and bring them up into effectively new IP for their company in a very kind of constructive manner. We, often use the terminology, which I think some of your engineers would recognize, of first class, that we think that in a world where, many companies are moving from historically an on-premise, use of applications and data to a disaggregated network architecture where apps and data are on various platforms, public and private cloud platforms, that the need for controls to really be thought of as a first-class both problem and to move them into what becomes more of an agile and data and IP-driven framework is essential. So we provide a SaaS service that really does that for our customers and lets them be able to get to scale of their usage of cloud, to get to the ability to have a lot of federation and a lot of empowerment of people in their organizations, but with an overarching and automated framework for control, and making sure that that's efficient and it's comprehensive.
All right, great. So are we talking about automated cloud governance here? Is that part and parcel for it, or is that pretty much the umbrella term that you would use?
So we use the term automated cloud governance, and to us, that means something. I ask many people what governance means. You get a lot of different answers, but our perspective is that having the ability to know what are the things that are appropriate, what are the rules that make sense for your business, how do you think about who's allowed to do what are the types of ways that services need to be configured in order to operate parts of your business. These all come into the governance of IT and management of your applications and data. So we really look at all those as being very important, that they're moving from effectively, again, being done by hand or being done in non-digital form into, a structure that really follows the principles of software development. So having artifacts that are effectively immutable, that are versioned, knowing the provenance of what your policies as code are and how they apply to different parts of your business and your applications, having the ability to maintain roles and responsibilities. So who's allowed to create policy, who's allowed to consume that policy, how does it differ for different parts of your business? Many of our customers are large, complex companies, and therefore they have lots of different rules, and sometimes those rules may contradict themselves when you look at it in the context of your business. And so we support the basis to bring all these items into what becomes a fully managed life cycle, and maintain that as data, therefore allowing for many of the tasks of validation, attestation of am I in control to become effectively automated from the content and the source of truth that they're managing now, this as data forms.
All right, a lot of that sounds very familiar to me. Quick caveat: Don and I actually worked together on a document with the ONUG working group for automated cloud governance. So it sounds an awful lot like the paper that we came up with, which is awesome, I guess.
Certainly similar in objective and in concept, and I think what we heard in that process, working with the great team at ONUG, was just that this is a problem that almost every company has. It's not domained by the industry, whether you're regulated or not regulated, to get to the ability to operate with the agility of cloud and work at cloud speed. Really means you need to be investing in solutions that allow you to support moving all parts of your control functions and your control decision making into what is also going to be agile. That often where we see issues with the consumption of cloud, where there's friction, where there's challenges, it's usually related to the inability to manage and really get the benefits of cloud while maintaining a waterfall and much more of a static approach to control design and implementation. And where we see great success is where companies have the ability to really move their controls and processes into an agile and data and IP-led process. And that's what we look to do.
All right. So Scott, why do you think this is so difficult?
Well, I think this is a challenge partly because we're dealing with a paradigm shift in the technology base. And so the traditional ways that enterprises exerted control or even understood what was happening in their organizations don't apply so much in cloud. We don't have the same perimeters. We don't have the same processes that organizations use that to acquire IT equipment and services. And so this has all become democratized. It can be done on a credit card without oversight of purchasing organizations or the CFO or the compliance or control teams. So clearly that changes part of it. And the second is that the speed and scale of innovation that's expected now, that's expected from these investments in cloud, is dramatically faster than what most enterprises have had to deal with before. Mm-hmm. And so lines of business are scrambling. They're investing very heavily to compete, to differentiate, or in some cases just to keep up with their more innovative competitors. And so in this, rush to innovate, there's become a huge gap between the pace of innovation and the tools and ability and processes and technology that's available to help organizations understand what they're doing and what the implications of it are. And the way that the Concourse has approached this is to realize that you have to address the complexity of the enterprise, and you have to bring a new set of approaches, including a rich new set of technology to solve this problem. And fundamentally, that's what we do, and I think that's the reason behind the funding that we're announcing, and also behind such the demand that we're all seeing in the market for a solution here. It has to be something new. It has to be something innovative. The old approaches just won't work.
All right. So do you guys think that we're kind of at this tipping point, if you will, to kind of need this these controls in place, or do you think that this is kind of a problem that's always been there and nobody's really wanted to address it before?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, looking back, and, I spent a lot of my life at places like Goldman Sachs helping build, lead, and manage, large enterprise, complex, mission-critical applications and data. And I think that, what's really different here is that, many of the processes that you could afford to do in terms of ensuring that you were, in compliance with your control and compliance needs on premise were very different. It were much simpler. You could basically take much more of a, trust and verify, doing periodic reviews, perhaps, as part of an audit cycle annually. As you start to move into the public internet in particular, and the public, cloud, that just doesn't work. And you're finding now where so many of your usage of cloud, the way you're constructing your applications in the cloud, that all needs to be continuously verified, that you really can't, you have to assume I can't trust, I just have to be able to ensure that everything is always working. And that, as Scott said, is a paradigm shift for how people have done this in the past. And so I think, many of the approach that we take for really bringing this first-class architecture where you can get to automation of controls and continuous control management is beneficial, whether it's on-prem or off-prem. It's more efficient and better on-prem. It's just that the need is not as extreme as it is when you start moving into the public cloud, and the risks, fundamentally change. And therefore, as such, the processes that you need to apply and the approach that you have to go after it, both in terms of real implementation as well as just philosophically has to move into a model that says I need to be continuously controlling things. I need to do that from a point of view of automation versus process, and I need to make sure that it can deal with the veracity of change and the speed of change that a large or really any business is going to have to manage as they move more and more of their business onto the public cloud. So we see it as partly a tipping point issue as well, that looking ahead, we think that the next 10 years will really be about the enterprise cloud story. And we're seeing, across the board, again, across multiple industry vectors, that the push to transformation is driving a fundamental shift to the use of public cloud, which requires now increasingly large amount of companies that have to deal with these needs and think about how they can bring a new architecture to really operate in an automated form.
All right. So, do you think that the pressing issues that are happening in the cloud these days, as it relates to security or compliance or just complexity of the cloud environments, do you think that that's that what is the most pressing issue is kind of a moving target? Are we looking at issues that are rather static and easily addressable, or is it something that you never really it kind of changes maybe from day to day?
Yeah, I think the one thing that you have to really embrace when you start looking at moving businesses to the public cloud is that change is just a constant. Your applications and the way you use the cloud is going to change. The cloud providers and the services that they bring and make available to your company change all the time. And therefore the way you're going to think about controls and think about ultimately ensuring that your usage of these services is appropriate is going to change a lot too. We see many customers struggling with how do you move from a point of view of infrastructure as a service, where you have a lot more control over the design and configuration of how that service operates in the cloud, to things like PaaS services, which are very much now about, are you behaving and are you monitoring and creating controls that are less about how do you configure that service, but how you are aware and can observe the usage of that service and determine if it's appropriate or not, depending on your business and the context of that. And so we see all of these as being change vectors that just mean that for the point of view of an institution that's looking to move to cloud, it's an and clause. You have every single one of these dimensions just creates more needs to think about your risk and control, think about how you're going to manage it differently, and then certainly from a scalability perspective, a world where many of these companies have more applications and data than people, you have to really be thinking about automation as a central point, because it will be almost impossible to get to scale and control without something that founds you in automation.
And I'd add that the one thing that's changing in a fairly consistent way is the expectations and the costs of not getting control, right? And so if we look at the regulatory environment, we're seeing substantial movement that's been developing for holding enterprises accountable for their data privacy obligations and other regulatory obligations. We're seeing that regime spreading from certain geographies like Europe into individual states like California. And there's no sign that that is going to change, that's going to abate at all. It's going to continue. And the penalties, the costs are getting harsher, it seems, every week, every month, every quarter. The cost of GDPR violation can be a substantial percentage of companies' revenue. The penalties that are associated with monetary fines like this continue to grow. But then there's also the weariness of the consumers and the breach of trust in a brand as companies move more and more online, and more of their interactions, as we've seen in the past months, more of their interactions become online. The tolerance for not grappling with this problem of exerting enterprise control and understanding and controlling the risk becomes less and less. And so I think we're going to see increased movement from regulators, legislatures, boards, shareholders, insurers. All the constituents here that are involved are going to demand that organizations get control over their use of IT, and that becomes really complicated, as we've discussed in cloud. And so I think that's going to drive demand for a new approach, a comprehensive approach, an approach, as Don said, one that can adapt as the technology changes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's a complex problem, I know, and obviously there are no easy answers. If there were, then obviously you guys wouldn't be in business. So I applaud you for taking this issue on, and I wish you guys the best luck moving forward.
Thank you very much, Charlene.
All right, guys, stick around. We have lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
No problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place, you know?
Wow.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Hey everybody, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps. And one of the things that we do, and I think we do very well on the sites, is all of the webinars that we put together. So I thought it'd be great if we could talk about some of the webinars that we have coming up, just to let you guys know about them. Hopefully we'll get you signed up for them. Our first webinar that I wanted to highlight is happening this Wednesday on Devops.com, June 17th. It's called A Decade of DevOps, Design Patterns for Future-Proofing Your DevOps Strategy. This one is actually sponsored by JFrog, and it features an analyst from 451 Research, and they're going to be talking about how organizations can future-proof their DevOps strategy, and even in the face of massive technological upheaval, business disruption. Jay Lyman is a great analyst. He's got a lot of really great insights, so I hope that you'll be able to tune in for that one. Again, that one is Wednesday, June 17th. Also on Thursday, June 18th, we've got one that is called Prepare Your DevOps Culture to Withstand the Digital Experience Onslaught. And I know a lot of organizations are experiencing this right now, going through times of upheaval and just massive disruption as the focus on digital experiences becomes more and more of an issue and really a core business tenet for a lot of organizations. So I hope you'll tune in for that. The speakers for that one are Marco Coulter, who is the technical evangelist at AppDynamics, and he's actually going to be joined by Justin Donahue, who is the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Observium. So please tune in for that one, as I think it's going to be a really, really great conversation. Also, we have coming up on Security Boulevard a webinar Wednesday, June 17th also, that is called Threat Informed Defense, Transforming the Security Organization as We Know It. And we have two speakers for that webinar who are going to talk about how companies have kind of realigned their security strategy to really focus on threat-informed defense. That's measuring against the mapping and testing of known hacker tactics, techniques, and procedures. Yeah, so that's it. So we've got Pete Luban, who is the head of cybersecurity and IT risk at Dimensional Fund Advisors. We've got Chris Kennedy, who's the CISO at Attack IQ. And we also have John Fung, who is Associate Director of Cyber Content and Threat Hunting at Raytheon. These guys all know their stuff. They know what they're talking about. They've done it. So I really hope that you'll tune in and hear what they have to say and their best practices for implementing a threat-informed defensive strategy. All right, we're going to be doing this every episode of TechStrong TV, highlighting a couple of the webinars that are coming up. I do webinars for the sites all the time. So I know I know that I'm a voice, at least, for a lot of you out there. So I hope you'll continue to tune into the webinars. I love doing them. I think they're a great asset to the organization and really to anybody who tunes in. So informative. We always learn a lot. So I hope that you guys continue to tune into the webinars, and hopefully we'll see you over there. But for now, thanks for listening.
Back here now, it's time to head over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch, where Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group, has, as usual, great guests and commentary to bring to you today. So let's head over to Mitchell. Mitchell, go ahead.
Hi, welcome to Analyst Corner. I talked yesterday about the changes that we're seeing in the market, companies reacting to COVID-19, but more in a permanent way. Specifically, we're talking about Starbucks and their acceleration of their shift to on-the-go services. I didn't mention it in the conversation yesterday. It was actually something that they've had underway for some time. There was a great article about it they published themselves, going back to July of 2019. So it wasn't a new idea, but it accelerated their moving to in-person services that are on the go rather than the cafe experience that we're all used to today. Of course, that's driven by and accelerated because of customer changes in behaviors, expectations, what they want, how they want to interface and interact with our businesses. I know we're opening things back up in our economies, and I think we're already seeing that there are some things we have to step back and correct. The lack of following social distancing, and just an experience I had over the weekend, to be honest with you, was not a pleasant one. One company that I visited, Columbia, going into their store, you wouldn't know that we were trying to implement wearing masks or social distancing other than the marks on the floor, because nobody was following it, nobody was enforcing it. Merrill, on the other hand, was doing a decent job of trying to implement that the best they could. So hands off to them. That store I'll repeat, go back to. Columbia, probably not, which speaks to what I'm talking about. There was an interesting article I came across. A couple of PwC folks were talking about a shift from sales culture to service culture. And the way I look at that sort of idea a little bit differently than they were taking it in the article, but some similarities too, is really when things are, you should be doing this anyway, and we talk about customer intimacy and our engagement with customers. Now more than ever, we must be listening to customers. We must be learning from them because they are setting the behavior requirements for how they want to interact with businesses and who they're going to choose to do business with. I'm not going back into that Columbia store. In fact, I don't know if I even order online from them. If I get a Columbia product, I'll just probably order it through a more convenient channel like Amazon or some other location, REI or somebody that I'd like to deal with on a regular basis. It was not well done, and just says to me they're not taking that serious. Now, you could take that to an extreme and say maybe I don't buy any more products from Columbia, and I suppose that's a possibility too in some situations. I would expect that to be similar reactions of other customers. And whether you fall on the side of we have to open up the economy and sort of just live with the death count, which I don't. Yes, we need our economies up and running, but it's a managed approach to it because we just can't accept unlimited deaths. Or you really are careful and cautious about how you interact with others in society because of a health concern, you're in a high-risk category, maybe a family member, those kind of things. Those are driving changes about how businesses interact with all of us. And they aren't temporary. Most of those are probably going to remain permanent because even if you just take it at a very, very kind of basic look at the market and say everyone that's 60 and above or 65 and above, probably going to be doing a lot of limiting of their interaction face-to-face with businesses in a retail setting. If they're not going out to buy, they're going to need some form of a digital experience, a carry out, curbside delivery, all of those kind of things. And Starbucks is a perfect example. They already saw for other reasons the shift on the go. So I think this idea of a very customer-centric, a very not a selling type culture, but one that we're really fanatically intent on listening to our customers, understanding why they're changing what they're changing in their behaviors and how they interface with, having mechanisms to get back that kind of feedback. I mean, I would like a Yelp for all businesses to be able to say, didn't enjoy my experience in that particular store, not going to be back for the following reasons. Would love it if they instituted some changes that I would like to see. Customer of one, maybe doesn't make an impact. All of us speak up. I think we're seeing in society today that makes a difference. So as we adjust to a new normal, I think we unplug from this idea of a new normal and really think about continually to reinvent what our experience is with customers, because we don't know what's going to happen. And we know also that this pattern change that we're underway and seeing from ourselves, from our customers, from our partners, our suppliers, isn't just going to magically fall back into place of how it operated before. We're investing, we're making investments, for example, and going to this from a retail to a walk-up on the go model. That isn't a small investment. They're closing 400 stores, opening 300 new ones, and remodeling a number of stores. In Starbucks' case, a huge amount of investment in doing that. They're not making that as a small bet; it's a big bet, and I think many other stores are going to do the same. So think about that: how your culture can adapt to this more customer-centric model, this service culture, and really understanding and listening to and embracing in a very fanatical way, not just a casual way, we have to adjust to the market, changing conditions. Because frankly, I believe the people who are fanatical about it are the ones that are going to win. It's also going to drive success in their own digital transformation projects, their own digital projects to delivering goods and service, because they're going to react faster, and customers are going to they're going to flock to places that they think serve them in a way they'd like to be served. So let's move to that service culture, moving away from a sales culture.
Devops.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. Devops.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. Devops.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. Devops.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hello. Welcome to Tutorial 6 in the Engineering DevOps series of tutorials. In this tutorial, we'll explore how do you engineer application release automation for DevOps. I am Mark Hornbeek, DevOps the Gray. I'm CEO and Principal Consultant of Engineering DevOps Consulting, analyst for the Accelerated Strategies Group, ambassador and course author for the DevOps Institute, blogger on devops.com, and author of the book you see here, Engineering DevOps. My website is www.engineeringdevops.com. Let's get into this. How do you engineer application release automation for DevOps? So the agenda is, what is it? Application release automation, often referred to as ARA. Why is ARA important to engineering DevOps? How does it work? What are some of the engineering practices? What are some of the steps to implement ARA, and a summary? By the way, all of this information is also available on my website as a white paper, as you can see on the left, if you go to www.engineeringdevops.com documents. Okay, so what is application release automation? This is a big picture blueprint. If you looked at some of the earlier tutorials in the series, you would see this DevOps blueprint. ARA is part of the top layer of the blueprint underneath value stream management and over and above CI/CD pipelines. The general idea is that ARA, which is also, by the way, sometimes referred to as application release orchestration, basically these solutions realize an abstraction layer over the pipelines, and they have capabilities to model pipelines, to organize and control and visualize CI/CD pipeline and their stages and components, and control the gates between the stages of those pipeline components. So that's what ARA generally is. Why is it important to DevOps? Well, it provides some ability to separate the things that need to be controlled from the things that are controlling, because it's a middle layer, if you like, in the overall DevOps blueprint. So this enables economies of scale and scope if you want to basically have a tool chain without having to stitch everything together manually or with a lot of scripting. It provides essentially an automation backbone that tools can be plugged into in some level of standardized approach through plugins and various things that are compatible with the particular ARA solution. It provides a level of abstraction for pipelines in a number of ways. You can have a pipeline that abstracts the application, so you can have one pipeline variation that can work with different applications. It provides abstracts for the artifacts of the application, so the data and different components of the abstract, the way it's configured, the topology, and also the configuration data for things like the infrastructure and the environment aspects of what's the pipeline runs on and the applications are running on, whether they're virtual or real physical systems. And also the process artifacts, so the pipeline and anything that's making up the pipeline and the ways that it works, workflows and so on. All of these things can be abstracted in a good ARA solution. And that makes it a lot easier to take the same pipeline and repurpose it for other applications, or maybe change out the environment aspects and different things without changing or redoing the whole pipeline. Okay. If you were to consider, if you didn't have an ARA solution, then the things that it would enable, if you have it, it would basically release velocity, productivity, and continuous delivery that's enabled by ARA. How is it doing that? Well, it's doing it because you can configure these things very quickly, and it's providing an automation backbone. But without an ARA, you'd have trouble potentially with application quality, because the tools may not be cooperating very well together if you don't have a well-engineered solution. You can have security events, pipeline failures, a lot of interruptions and reverts, having to roll back to a prior version, process delays, scheduling delays, cost overruns, and audit failures. So there's a lot of things. If you don't have some form of ARA, if you really just have a series of tools, you really don't have a very professional solution. And ARA platforms provide a professional solution for those problems. There are other ways to do it rather than professional ARA tools. You can, in fact, code your own system or have things very tightly integrated for particular applications. But in general, that ARA layer, that it provides those benefits and avoids these problems. Okay, so how does it actually work? This diagram at the top is essentially an ARA blueprint. Again, it shows you that there's a control layer, an observation layer over the CI/CD stages, and underneath it you've got different automation activities that can be enabled and automated through ARA scripting or coding. It may not be scripting, sometimes it's just data, declarative statements. It's things like specifying the task in a backlog and rolling those into the planning phase, so that they can be used during the subsequent coding and test phase, kicking off static analysis within development and unit tasks, creating tests themselves, and running the environments for those things, setting up builds. So you can go through the list, but basically that's what ARA does. It has capabilities to model the pipeline, to manage the pipeline once it's modeled, to keep track of what's going on with the different stages, to orchestrate the environment by driving the infrastructure that is needed to support whatever is happening in the pipeline at any one point in time, whether it's a build, a test, or whatever's going on. It can automate releases because it's keeping track of the the release metrics, and therefore support deployment as well after the release is accepted and that meets the metrics. It can orchestrate the deployment, and in general provide an interface for higher level API management through value stream management tools or other platforms or solutions at that higher level if you want to do very end-to-end orchestration and monitoring for things like governance, overall security, site reliability engineering, and other applications that are often handled at the VSM level. Okay, so how does ARA actually work, or ARO, depending on your favorite acronym? You essentially have a gate criteria coded, so it controls the flow of changes between the different stages in the pipeline. So you can model the stages. It can deploy, binaries and packages and artifacts to target environments through its orchestration capabilities. It provides a consistent automation approach for the pipeline, so you don't have different automation strategies for different parts of the pipeline. It provides a dashboard and an API to make the metrics visible, or at least consumable by other levels if you have other things doing that, such as a VSM. And release coordination can be done, with activities that are manual with humans, or the VSM system interacting with that, or other higher level systems that are doing things such as governance, site reliability, and security, and various things. There are a lot of features in ARA tools. If you're looking for one, you can piece together an ARA solution with scripts and just tool features. Why do that if there are tools available? Well, one reason might be you can't afford an ARA tool, but nevertheless, should be looking for certain features if you're looking for an ARA tool, whether you're doing it yourself or buying one. Complete capabilities include things like having a core automation engine, some job scheduling features, pipeline decision support systems for validating whether things are suitable to progress down the pipeline, support for different infrastructures and environments like clouds or non-clouds, ease of use, of course, whether that be an API user or a human user, having a database to manage all the artifacts and things that are associated with the pipeline and the things that are being used to support the pipeline. Decision there is whether you use agents versus agentless structures. Some people say agents are better because they can scale better and provide better security capabilities. There's a debates one way or the other, but I tend to prefer agents approach myself. High availability. Well, a lot of these systems are built so that you can have duplex high availability configurations. If one side goes down, if it goes down, an active side will take over. And of course, a lot of integrations with a lot of plugins would be a major benefit for any ARI tool that you choose to use, because any one DevOps pipeline tends to have quite a few tools. 15 to 20 is not an unusual number of tools that make up an entire pipeline for even one application. Okay, the pipeline itself, there are some different practices that you would want to look for, things like starter templates to simplify onboarding new applications so that you don't have to do everything all over again, lots of integration plugins for the different DevOps tools, support for virtual and cloud, Azure, AWS, VMware, of course, Kubernetes and different things these days. Pipeline as code would be nice to be supported with a declarative language like YAML. Environments should be defined and referenced abstractly rather than, so that you can mix and match different environments without changing the rest of the pipeline code. Supporting different scheduling features such as blackout periods, maintenance and conflicts between uses. Build and release pipelines should be decoupled from the apps and the infrastructure, again, so that you can repurpose those. Manual interactions and tasks should be integrated into the gates so that you don't have to, if you can't automate something or if it's difficult, you can still get the benefit of getting the data in at least a semi-automatic and processable way. Release templates should be reusable across the different teams, application and releases. Agent architecture, again, offers scalability and security, as well as integration with legacies, mainframes, and middleware products. It's important. What about management? Well, management features, things like release pipelines shouldn't be hard-coded. Target environments should be as code, the releases. Modeling application microservices should include native support for some of the popular tools like Helm and Docker, Compose, etc. The user interface should be easy for application users, and it should integrate well with planning features like Kanban, backlog tasks, sprints, Jira, service, other tools that have to do with planning, capabilities to track the usage and inventory and what's been released, where, when, and by whom. It's very useful to diagnose issues or to keep track of issues as they're occurring going through the pipeline. And analytics and dashboards need to be available for release support, snapshot status, as well as trend analysis as much as they can. So these are good management features in any ARA solution. So if you have this is again kind of a high-level checklist. Unless your environment's really simple with very few variations, it's probably better to choose an ARA tool set, because we just went through a whole list of things that aren't trivial to realize if you want to do your own thing. So you can afford it. You have complex solutions, and you probably should be able to afford a good ARA tool. The primary factors for determining the tool are things, as we mentioned, the features, but in addition, things like proven solution, the way gate criteria are specified, make sure that's good, make sure you've got the scale you need, it's got the licensing model that you want to support, there's tech support, there's competitive cost of ownership, be a single platform rather than siloed products having to be stitched together. Some of the ARA solutions actually are not really one solution. They have to be, stitched together with scripts and overarching tools to make it work end to end. Of course, ease of use, things like being mobile friendly, a lot of things, especially these days, working remote, making sure things are able to be used remotely, supporting any scripting language that you need or need to be familiar with, make sure it's easy to debug, lots of tool plugins, and other options like SaaS. So basically that's the tutorial for today. What is ARA? And in particular, how do you engineer application release automation for DevOps? This is the summary statement we've been looking towards throughout this little tutorial. So basically my point here is that unless your DevOps environment is simple, with very few variations of applications, pipeline tools, and infrastructure choices, then you should probably architect the solution around a proven ARA or ARO solution, a tool set, choose a solution that have the capabilities that we've listed to model, organize, control, and visualize CI/CD release pipelines, as I discussed in the tutorial. So basically that's it. If you want to learn more about ARA, I refer you to the white paper or my book. You can contact me directly at mhornbeek@engineeringdevops.com. Get a copy of my book at mybook.to Engineering DevOps, or the white paper at engineeringdevops.com/documents. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial in the series. Thank you.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
When the folks at Gigamon started up a new video podcast on incident response, threat intel, cyber, they came to us if we'd like to add this into the mix over on TechStrong TV. And we're always looking for good content here and to bring you what we think is quality. And I think the Gigamon show is. This is the third episode of their video cast. And in this episode, Danny actually has some members of the IBM X-Force Incident Response and Intelligence Services team. And they're going to talk about what really happens when they're responding to a breach and incident. Right, from boots on the ground and everything else. I think you're going to find it a fascinating talk if you're not familiar with incident response. So let's now go to the Gigamon video podcast and Danny and his guest.
My name is Danny Akatsuki. I'm going to introduce Actually, I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us what they do. Let us start with Jordan.
This is Jordan Rogers. I'm a global client strategy and remediation lead. I've worked in IR, network forensics, networking, and storage. So kind of and help desk. So I've had a pretty varied background.
And next we have Mr. Matt Defer. Would you tell us a little bit about what you do, Matt?
Hey, I'm Matt Defer. I'm the North American Incident Response Function Lead for IBM X-Force Iris. Previously did incident response consulting with Mandiant and was a digital forensics and malware reverse engineer for the U.S. Navy active duty.
Awesome. And finally, we have Mr. Robert Gates. Robert, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, this is Robert. I have been on the Iris threat hunt team for the last year and a half. Previous to that, I spent about 10 years in the sort of the government intel space, and then prior to that, it was a military. I was in the Air Force for 20 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you all you guys for coming on. This is going to be awesome. So we actually opened up this this podcast series with talking about speaking of threat hunting, Robert. That's what my team does. We advise clients on how to use our threat hunting platform, and you know, we work with them on things like you know, when they after they POC post sale, we say, okay, let's sit down. I am your dedicated resource. You're not emailing, you know, some random list in 24 to 48 hours you get a response back. You're talking to me directly. So what do you need to do? Like, what are you trying to hunt for? What does your first, second, third quarter look like? So yeah, we started out with that. And then took a little bit of a detour to working from home, and one of our original ideas, you guys were actually going to be our first one, but now we're finally getting to you, is incident response. Because to me, I don't know, maybe a lot of people think that the sexiest thing about security and hacking or whatever is being a red team and breaking stuff and getting in, and I'm in, you know, be like be a physical pen tester like Deviant Olaf and hide in an elevator for 8 hours till the building closes. Like, that's cool. To me, IR is hands down of probably the most exciting thing to me about this whole thing. I love hearing IR pros talk about their history, like what they've done. So let's start with Jordan. What led you to IR? Like what got you in, and you've been doing it for how long?
I guess like a decade now. Yeah, had to think about it. I'm getting old. What got me into it really was we started doing PCI security when I was doing networking and storage, and nobody wanted to do that. And then we had meaningful use and HIPAA and high tech coming out. So we also had to do PCI on top of those. And then we started putting in tools, things like that. And then we started, since I was the only guy doing security, I started doing the internal investigations, which then led to, like HIPAA violations, things like that. And then that led me to start into anytime we had a malware outbreak, et cetera, I started to come in and help with those things. So really just kind of fell into it because I was the only one willing to do it at the healthcare system. So, and then I got hooked.
Oof, healthcare.
It's kind of like, yeah, right. I know. Well, I did say HIPAA and high tech and meaningful use. So, if you can't figure that out, maybe you shouldn't be listening to this podcast.
Well, okay, listen. Qualification, because we've been friends for a long time, I am conditioned to only listen to like every fourth word you say. Because I usually have to get a lot of other things done. You throw a lot of words out, and I figure I can grok the topic of conversation if I tune out once in a while. So that's going to be a hard habit to break in the next 45 minutes. Forgive me.
I definitely will not.
This is where we start the awkward silence because Jordan and I are like, how do we talk to each other professionally? Matt, as what?
I was gonna say, why don't we jump over to Matt?
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna stay with Matt. Actually, I'm gonna stay with Matt and Robert now. You can just drop off the call. I think me, Matt, and Robert will hang out. We'll be fine.
All right.
Get back down here. Matt, as your North American IR function lead, and I know. By the way, I love IBM's titles. I don't get awesome titles. I get like you're a senior, and actually, here's your thing, and you get maybe like 2 words. You guys get awesome titles. As North American IR function lead, how much travel are you doing, man? Because like IR is one of those things that it can be done remote, but like if you got to be boots on the ground, hands on, what is that travel like for you? I mean, not now, but like before.
Yeah. I think it kind of varies on the client's need, really. Some incidents are easily handled, basically easily handled remotely, and the client is okay with that and prefers that kind of methodology. But there are clients who have specific situations where having an on-site presence is definitely not only required but recommended. For specific situations like destructive malware, or part of the environment is just completely hosed, and so they need help with not only containment and remediation, but also kind of where to even start. And so really your goal at that point, as the person who's on site and kind of helping coordinate both the IR effort that's happening back home with all the different individual contributors on our side from the incident response effort perspective, and then a couple of people on site kind of coordinating client, helping them do the part that they need to do. If we're deploying technology, helping them get critical aspects of their environment up and running so that business operations can continue and those types of things. But I would say, last year I traveled a lot, but doesn't look like it's shaping up to be that way this year.
So, and that's how, because like IR doesn't stop. Like intrusions aren't going to stop. Breaches aren't going to stop. Viruses don't stop these things. So on those types of gigs that you would normally have to be on site because it's required and it's recommended, but now you can't. How do you handle that now? Like how does IR look in this new reality that we're in of people social distancing and can't be like how are you guys going to handle that?
Well, I think right in the first couple of months of this coronavirus thing, IR security in general kind of went to the back burner for a lot of companies, and they focused their efforts to try and figure out how they can get business moving forward and have a significantly increased remote workforce, right? And so their efforts are kind of focused in that area. And so this is obvious. This is I think for a lot of us is that we're going to get hit with a lot of IRs all at once when people finally figure out how to work again, which I think is starting to happen now. We're starting to see an uptick in things are coming in. It's a little less of a ghost town, kind of vibe, right, as it was like last month. But as far as we can do an incident response effort completely remotely. We don't need to be on site as long as the client has, and other industry firms have that capability as well. But as long as the client can support that effort, and in some cases they may need to have someone who's physically, at the rack or in a specific area where they can, if a system has been contained or something along those lines, or we need to dig into a specific system, you might need someone who can collect, specific evidence or even physical evidence and to take a look at. But other than that, we leverage the client's technical support team as much as possible for deploying technology in the environment, gaining visibility, those types of things. But I think with a lot more of our clients' workforce working from home, I think that becomes a little bit more tricky, and I think communication between us and the client needs to be during these types of times needs to be a little bit more robust. So it really just kind of boils down to communication with the client, about tasking and what their specific goals are and how we can achieve those remotely. And if we can't, we can't. We can still go on site during all of this if we need to. Obviously, we would prefer not to, but
right. How do you handle things like needing to stay out of band for your communications? Because what if there's an ongoing breach and you don't know if you've actually kicked them out yet? You don't know what kind of eyes or ears they have on you. Is that a concern of you can't be face to face, with people? Are you still doing the same kinds of sanitary things like, keeping a low profile, sending emails and communications like that? How do you handle out of band communications when you have to be in band and you're remote?
I think if the situation requires out of band communications, it becomes pretty evident up front. If we're dealing with a specific, actor, or if we're dealing with a business email compromise potentially, or something along those lines that could have implications where communication channels are compromised. We have recommendations for how to handle out of bound traffic or communications with that. And we have a couple of different ways that we do that. We have some collaboration software that we can use that's, kind of hosted by IBM. We can also bring them into our business communication software. I won't name any names, but we can bring them in and have basically have a chat with them, or create a chat room, and we can collaborate through IBM hosted communication software.
So Robert, what kinds of things can people do right now in terms of threat hunting to, as I mentioned, like being proactive and looking for the things that you don't know about because of the situation that Matt was just talking about people not super concentrating on IRs and stuff right now, and then gonna have and just get inundated and blown over by IRs later, potentially. What kinds of things can they be doing from a seasoned threat hunter perspective to kind of steel themselves for that, or maybe to guard against that?
I mean, for us, it's for a client, it would be focusing on the threats that they face, instead of getting that information fatigue or alert fatigue that a lot of people, because there's tons of feeds out there, whittling that down to something more specific to your particular industry or whatever, and then have a better understanding of what the typical threat groups that are targeting your organization, what they, because they're evolving, right? They're changing some of their tactics because our workforces have shifted their, where they are, where they're more remote workers and things like that. So now maybe there's more spear phishing. So, being on top of that and seeing if they do adopt new tools while we're not looking. So things like that, understanding, possible infrastructure moves, because a lot of people are tracking, where certain threat groups infrastructure exists, and just, like I said, tracking that kind of stuff.
Where do you go? And this will kind of be for all of you, but since I already have Robert talking, where do you go to get your intel, right? Where do you go to keep up both on higher fidelity intel and also newer threat hunting tactics, right? Because I know for me, especially when I was consulting, and I've been on this kick a lot lately because people have asked me career advice to be a threat hunter and blah 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 blah. Of where do you go to learn new tactics? Because I can sit down when I was a consultant in front of a new client every time, and it's going to be different almost every time. It's going to be new data sets. It's going to be new networks, new leadership, new silos, all this kind of thing. Where are you going? Whether it's Twitter or blogs, dark reading, whatever, to kind of keep your skills sharp and keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening out there.
Basically, all sort of all the above, right? Looking at Twitter, because a lot of times especially in the malware arena, I've noticed they'll release a lot of their research because there's not necessarily enough there for, say, a formal report, but it gives you a high-level understanding of some of the functionality that you could potentially be facing. And in fact, where I'm working with an IR team now with like a ransomware incident with some really obscure piece of ransomware, and that there was a tweet that was put out there that allowed me to sort of get some understanding that there is, another version of it. So then that allowed me to sort of pivot into like Virus Total to try to find some other samples, see if they exist. And then you can use like domain tools to track some of the domains if they're using C2 domains or anything like that. Yeah, like I said, it's whittling down all that because again, it could be information overload. And sort of the threat hunter mindset of taking it beyond just what you're seeing and trying to find out more about it. Because a lot of times you do see like they're the end results, right? They're the IOCs that come out of the end, like the hashes or the domains or the IPs, and to dig in further to better understand that threat. So that way, when we're working with like an IR or something like that, we can provide them that additional context so it can facilitate their hunts.
Jordan, no, go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say, I was like, leveraging like Intel and the stuff that we're seeing like Robert's team do. So Robert, brings us all sorts of intel and things like that. But I end up handling a lot more on the crisis management lately. So I'm, as Matt was talking about earlier, I'm usually boots on ground, and then like Matt's team can do a lot of the sweeping and stuff like that. And then we leverage Robert's team to bring us a lot of like the intelligence and things along those lines. So it becomes really important for us to work with those guys, and also to know where they're sourcing their data, if they can share, and then we can kind of explain that to clients and things, because I think the biggest lack that I run into now in kind of my newer role is that there's communication gaps. And if you explain things to the client, like they don't necessarily I use a really beat up the phrase, but they don't need to see how the sausage is made. But if they know that it includes a few things, work and stuff like that in it, then they feel better. And I think communication is one of the biggest things that lacks. And as Matt touched on, when we're dealing with these remote cases, as long as we have good communication channels set up, the client stays calmer. They listen to us. We can communicate in a constant manner. But one of the difficulties is when you have those conference calls where they want to throw 35 people on the conference call and everybody wants to talk. You're like, guys, stop. We need to be very concise about our communication, because that's one of the things that if I don't communicate with my team and then I don't communicate that back to the client, we're going to run into issues, and then they're going to start panicking even more than they already are, because they're already running around with their hair on fire. Like, just stop real quick. We have a fire extinguisher. Just hang on.
Yeah, and like with 35 people, like you get, oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can anybody hear me? People leaving and not putting on mute and eating, and Jesus, like IR is hard enough, let alone having that. Although I think the good part about having maybe a lot of Zooms now or web or whatever people are using, is you get to see a lot of cats probably. So maybe that could take some of the stress off of IR.
I had my kid come up and just jump on me in the middle of a meeting the other day. I was on a Skype for business meeting, and my little guy just snuck down to the basement where I was working and just all of a sudden jumped on me, and I was like, "Oh, and here's my son. I'm sorry, guys, didn't notice he was here." But yeah, I mean, it's the new reality right now, and I think we all just kind of get it. So
did yours walk in naked? Because mine walks in naked all the time. Just
no, he did lick me though, which he's never done before, so that was interesting.
That's new.
Yeah,
that's a new feature. Actually, that's I actually love this question. Robert or Matt, do either of you have kids?
I have 2 dogs that are basically act like children.
No, fair enough.
I mean, that's what we have.
Fair enough. No, and you know what? I have dogs and I have a kid, and I defy anybody to tell me that having a dog isn't pretty damn similar to having a kid. One of my favorite descriptions was one of my old favorite shows, Scrubs. Dr. Cox gave the best explanation that having a kid is like having a dog that slowly learns how to talk. It's exactly what it is. And they pee the same. Yeah, my kid pees in the yard next to the dog. Like,
yeah, the only difference is that a human child eventually, and hopefully grows up to be a functioning member of society. I would never let my dog go out into society.
well, you know what? You say hopefully functioning, and it's ironic because your picture is right next to Joey's, so like, they can't all be functioning. Robert, do you have kids?
So I have a son that's 22 now, so he's out of the house. So we had that. I think we've had a dog in the past, and we don't have one right now. And it's funny you bring that up because my wife was sort of clamoring for a dog or something like that, and I was like, we've been an empty nesters for like at least a few years now since my son left, and our house is not dog or kid friendly anymore. Like, we're not kid safe. We leave things out and don't really concern ourselves. And in fact, some neighbors' kids were over here the other day, and next thing you know, they're picking up things and we're like, oh crap, what is that? Where are you you're gonna hurt yourself. So yeah, that's not something that we have right now. So yeah.
What are you, like, leaving out blowtorches and maces and knives and stuff?
Well, no, I mean, like, you might leave a pair of scissors on a desktop or something like that, not thinking about like, oh, I need to put that away because a 5-year-old might get a hold of that and they might start cutting their own hair or stabbing their brother or sister.
Yeah, try explaining that on a conference bridge at a breach at 3 a.m. Yeah, that would be super awkward if your son did the same as mine did and just walked into your conference naked. That actually wouldn't be as cute, I don't think. But yeah, no, I had done some other interviews. Like all of my team, I think, save for one of us, has kids and figuring that out, and then also trying to be in a very high pressure thing like IR, and still being like, yeah, Daddy will fix that in a little bit, but he's trying to save a company millions of dollars. So we've been talking for about 25 minutes now, and I don't have you guys all day, but the one thing that I did do is we talked about Twitter. And again, I'll say this on every single episode that I ever do, and I've said 100,000 times, Twitter is probably hands down, no, not probably, it is hands down my favorite source of intel, of figuring out new, because like whenever there's a breach, and it's made public, you have all of the experts giving their expert opinion right there, and you can call through that and you can talk to them directly. I love Twitter for this. I love hacker Twitter, InfoSec Twitter. So I went to Twitter, and I got some questions for all of you, and they're all relatively straightforward and actually serious questions. And a few of them are not, but those will be fun. So let's go. I'm going to throw this one to Matt. This one is from actually one of my people in my local DEF CON group, from Jump Ship. What's the first 90 minutes look like once you've gone hands on keyboard during an IR?
Well, usually we have some relevant information. We might even have already brought in one of our members from the threat intelligence team. We might already have, founded upon the initial information that the client has given us. So we probably, in the first 90 minutes, talking, we've already made it through, acquiring some type of data or getting some data from the client, and maybe we're in the middle of deploying technology with them, but we're also looking at some initial information, right? But at this point, we usually have some specific indicator that we're going to be looking for, right? And so usually at this point, we have kind of a focused, mind frame as, we're going to see if we can identify the reported activity, from the client, right? Within the data that's been provided within, and I guess this is kind of two types of situations, right? Generally, it takes a little bit for the client to, if we're deploying technology in the environment, we're trying to gain visibility over the entire environment. Usually that's something that happens in tandem with the first initial, point of analysis. Usually we're usually looking at some type of live response collection or some type of forensic image or log data or something that's been provided in the interim while we're deploying technology. So usually that first 90 minutes is done over a smaller set of data that we then try to, extrapolate some of that information that we can then, apply some of that knowledge and some of that insight that we gain from the initial data over the entire environment. And so that's usually what the first 90 minutes looks like of actually looking at data, right?
What's the so? And this is just something that popped into my head. Whenever I hear the term incident response, right? It is something that sounds very immediate, very dangerous and important, and time is of the essence and stuff. Is it as pulse pounding as all that? I think a lot of people, I mean, even me sometimes I get caught up in it, or like people just coming into doing IR. Are there sirens blazing? Are pulses racing, or is it kind of like, all right, there's a thing that's happening, and it moves at kind of a more measured pace? Or have you been on ones that were like, this thing happened now, and pulses are racing, and it's super important? Like, what's the actual ground truth of that?
Yeah, so definitely both, right? There are ones where the client has already contained a specific, environment where something happened, and we're just investigating what happened, giving them some type of, understanding of the activity that took place within that part of the environment. And then there are other ones where there's an active, threat actor in the environment. They have compromised privileged credentials, and they're moving laterally within the environment, and the client does not have visibility or the capability to stop that activity from happening. And so they're leveraging us to come in and try and help that from multiple different angles. And so those types of situations tend to be a little bit more immediate or urgent.
Awesome. This next one is, let's go to Robert for this one. Robert, this one is from @HermitHacker on Twitter. What log sources do you wish more organizations had already? Actually, no, there's 3 questions here. Let me look at this. Okay. Let's see if you can answer a 3-part question. What log sources do you wish more orgs had? What log granularity do most organizations not have that they should? And what log sources do orgs capture that are just crap and they don't need them? And is that ever a thing? Like, is there ever a log source that's like, this thing is always crap, why are you capturing all of this stuff? So let's start with the first one. What one do you wish that more organizations have?
So I let you go through all those questions and then, set it up perfectly. But I think that would be a better question for Matt or Jordan, because I don't really get to influence that. I really get the outcome. And a lot of times they'll whittle that down for me, so that way I don't have to spend hours going through a particular log source. So I think they would have a better perspective on that than I would.
Okay. Then Jordan.
I'm going to go with Matt because he does more hands-on now than I do. So throw it back to Matt.
Yeah.
So defer to defer.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's a really situational question. We do have clients who ingest every single event ID, from every endpoint in the environment to their SIM, and it just creates noise and issues with the size of the data and getting through that. I don't think that there's really a hard and fast rule for what you should be collecting, because I think that's a really situational based on your organization, your environment, what types of situations you're in, what types of systems you have in the environment. But I will say this: I wish that more Windows-based organizations used like Sysmon or we're collecting those types of really detailed event logs and those types of things, or even recording like 4688s, like process execution events. And the reason is because if you're investigating an incident that happened 6 months ago and the client's just now finding out about it, having some type of forensic look back capability, some type of historical look back capability as to what types of process execution artifacts are in the environment is really key to finding out what happened 6 months ago.
Why do you think not as many clients as you would like are logging those things? Is it space? or they just don't know?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's, you know, their SIM capability or their data, you know, storage capability for backing up those types of logs is, you know, it's a financial decision. You know, I don't know if you've looked at the pricing for Splunk lately, but it's pretty crazy.
I can always assume.
Yeah, and other SIM, you know, capabilities are priced pretty comparatively. You know, so it's, you know, it's a matter of, you know, it's whether or not you want to spend the money for, you know, for storing that type of activity or ingesting that type of activity. I think that dollar for dollar, that activity is probably better than a lot of the things that they are ingesting into their SIM, so or that they are, you know, backing up as far as you know, historical log data goes. But you know, the other point is, you know, I said it was both because I think a lot of organizations just don't know that that's a thing. You know, they don't have the awareness around how important, you know, these types of artifacts are for, you know, identifying something that happened in their environment.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that, I mean, there is something to be said for having been in this profession for a very long time. Things that we think are, you know, second nature or quote unquote, I hate the term, you know, obvious a lot of times, but and then like I'll get friends of mine who want to like write about something or make a talk about something, and one of the most frequent things I get is like, oh, everybody already knows X thing. Why would they want to hear it from me? And that's like, if you're making a talk specifically for hackers or specifically for InfoSec people, maybe. But I think more people should gear their talks for maybe somebody that might see this later that doesn't know that stuff, or is going to share that with, you know, maybe some guy in security shares it with another person, you know, in the organization, in networking or whatever, and maybe they take an interest in it, and then they get to know those things that aren't obvious. So. Yeah, that's awesome. Next one is for Jordan, I think, unless Jordan's going to punt this one too. How do you measure success or IR effect? This is from David Longenecker. How do you measure success or IR effectiveness? How do you pinpoint recurring themes to address? And what data and metrics do you have to improve IR?
So I'm gonna use the phrase that it depends on every client, right? If you're dealing with a massive ransomware incident, your success rate is how quickly you can get them up in a secure fashion, right? So we don't want to bring them back up and have the exact same thing be able to happen again, right? Like they're going to get dropped on immediately. So, you know, it's kind of how quickly can you get them secure and bring them back up to doing business as usual or close to business as usual. We worked a case where they were actually losing like over $5 million an hour. And yeah, I know. I saw your little face there.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's like way less than what you spend on hair product, though. So I mean, it's relative.
But yeah, so you know, the success factors I think are very dependent upon, you know, like actually getting metrics and things like that, because every incident's different. Like sometimes you might actually want to see where they're going, what their target is, you know, what their mission is, and you know, like Matt and I, you know, we've had the pleasure of tracking an attacker real time, you know, actually seeing bounce through systems real time. And so we're like, well, let's see what they're trying to get. What's their mission target? These guys are good. Let's see what their mission target is. And Matt, please interrupt me at any point. But you know, I think so. It's very different depending on the incident, and that's what kind of makes me like a junkie for this. Like one day I might be talking to a PR firm, writing a letter that's going to go to everybody publicly, and it's going to be in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. The next day I might be sitting there with Matt and Robert and talking about, okay, so how does, you know, whatever threat actor group move laterally? Do they use Emotet to TrickBot to Ryuk, or are they going to drop, you know, Cobalt Strike right away? Are they going to use some sort of interpreter or whatever? So it's always different and it's always fun. But I think that giving a pure metric on that, I don't think you would do it justice unless you had like true data science around it. And the reason I say that is because every incident is unique. Every client is a unique butterfly, a unique snowflake, right? You know, I mean, to me, getting a metric doesn't really do it justice. It's how do you impact the business? Is the business successful at coming back have we protected the brand? Have we protected the business's brand? Have we protected their legal risk? Have we protected their financial risk? Like, are we dealing with those things? And then on top of that, I would say, if you look at it, did you help them get to a better state after you were recovering in that recovery and remediation section? So that would be my statement. I mean, Robert or Matt, please go ahead and add if you want.
Well, I would think that it would be, two aspects or two perspectives for that, right? The business wants to get back to normal and quickly, right? They just want to get me. I want to start making the money and want to put my systems back into production. Where like maybe from the IR perspective, having that level of confidence that you actually got all of the malicious activity out of the network, and even on some level understanding, a better understanding of what the actors were doing, their lateral movement, their different TTP techniques that they use to facilitate their operation, and then understanding also that last piece where what they were actually after. So like I said, I think it's sort of like two perspectives. So I don't know how you would really track that, because if we're successful in better understanding an actor or a threat group or whatever, and we feel like we got them all, got the network completely cleaned out and stuff like that, but it took say it took a month for them to get to that point. Maybe from the business's perspective, they're not happy with that, right? It took longer than they wanted it done in 72 hours. And you're like, that's not going to happen.
All right, dude, that's awesome. And since we're on that point, and this is a question for any of you, because you had talked about watching the attacker go through real time and hop from system to system and that kind of thing. Another one was from Sec Farmer. If this has ever happened to any of you, when was the first time the attacker kicked you off of the box before you could kick them off, and how did you respond? Has that ever been a thing for any of you?
I've been in situations where the attacker knew we had agents in the environment, knew we had visibility in the environment, and they attempted to, and in some cases were successful uninstalling those agents from specific systems. And a lot of these, endpoint detection and response tools have tamper protection built into them, or have ways that you can, kind of hide that process. You're not naming it incident response agent.exe, right? It's running on the system, and those types of things. But yeah, I mean, we've definitely had situations where an attacker has, tried to tamper with that agent, or has even successfully uninstalled it in some cases.
Let's see. When people were on, so like when you're actively watching them in real time, I always picture like one dude at a keyboard and the other guys are like looking over his shoulder going, are you seeing this? Like, how's that actually work? Are you guys communicating like in your chat rooms or whatever, going, check this out, he's doing this or this thing? Like, it's like watching watching like a football game as they're doing it. Like, how does that go down?
That's not normal, by the way, Danny. What? That's not normal.
No, I figured it wasn't, but like I've heard it happen. So I'm, I hear talks by guys like Nick Carr and those guys about those kinds of stories. Like, okay, so we've established it's not normal, but have you seen it? Have you done it? And like, what are those communications like within your team of, this is happening now?
Yeah. So we had, Robert and I worked a case last year where we were already in the environment. We knew the attacker had credentials in the environment, and we were watching them move around the environment and trying to identify what their goal was going to be. We hadn't identified all of their means of access to the environment. We were still identifying new C2 infrastructure basically on an hourly basis. And so we weren't comfortable with pushing the client into a containment mode yet. And so we were just kind of trying to monitor what the attacker was doing. What credentials are they using to move around? What systems are they targeting? There was a lot of other moving parts to take into consideration. And lo and behold, one Saturday morning, they started deploying ransomware in the environment, in real time. And we actually caught that happening in real time, and were able to, get the client on the phone. The IR team was communicating, back and forth about things that we were identifying, new activity. The attacker seemed very active that day, right? They're obviously doing something, right? And so they started deploying ransomware in the environment, we identified that they hadn't actually executed it yet. They were able to push it out to about 5,000 endpoints of a like 20,000 endpoint environment before we were able to, actually contain that, right? So we coordinated with our IR team basically through chat. Hey, look, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, you're seeing this. We're trying to put all the pieces together before we go to the client with what's happening. We got them on the phone. We initiated some containment measures from the endpoint perspective through the agent that we had in the environment, and they also enabled some network-based containment, and those types of things from their end, as well as just kind of coordinating that containment effort before they were actually able to execute the ransomware. And so we were actually successfully able to kick them out before they were able to execute the ransomware and get it all in the system. So it was definitely one of those once in a lifetime kind of IR situations where, there's a destructive malware attack going on actively as you're in the environment, and you already have visibility and you already have the measures in place to contain that. It almost never happens that way. It's almost always we're coming in after the damage has already been done and we're just picking up the pieces. So that was definitely an interesting situation to be in. But
that actually goes into actually we're getting near time, so I have a few more questions, but that gets right into a question from the great Tim Malcolm-Vetter, Red Team lead director at Walmart. Is there anything more satisfying than kicking an adversary out of the environment?
I'll go. Not for me, really. I'm extremely passionate about IR. I'd like to be hands on keyboard. I'd like to be the one who's finding the evil. I'd like to be the one who's, digging into something and finding out more information about it. That's what I literally do this job for that, and if I ever get to a point where I'm not doing that, then I'm going to go do something else like, farming or something.
I would love to raise goats. That's I wish I could sustain that for myself.
I think that kicking them out is fantastic, and it's super fun, but also seeing, because again, like I end up being Matt might be remote and crushing through data, and same with Robert, right? They're going through tons of data, they're finding evil, but being on site a lot of times and hand holding the executives and the lawyers and the PR firm and all of those. It's really, really nice to see when they're like, thank you. And then you see that stress just come off of them. I think that for me is awesome. Catching bad guys. The only other thing that would be better than catching bad guys is if we could actually prosecute them, but that's a whole bunch of legal stuff that we can't do. So,
yeah.
But to me, I think, just as Matt said, if you don't enjoy this, you don't want to do this. I was up until midnight working last night. I was up till 1:30 in the morning the night before, and I get up at 5 a.m. when my little kids get up because they have to go to the bathroom or something, right? I mean, you're a dad, you get it, but you still want to do that, and you have to have your wife remind you, take a break, calm down, stuff like that. If I could show you my text message, she's like, you're not the only person who works. And I'm like, everybody else is up right now working. So, I think that's I think, like Matt said, you have to want to do this. It's kind of a rush. You come in and you're like, guys, this is fine. Everything's cool. We're going to be fine. But in the same time, you're like, if I catch these guys really fast, it's gonna be fun. You secretly you kind of get that little rush, and and the other thing I think is really fun is every incident tends to be that they can use similar tools, tactics, techniques, etc. But then all of a sudden you see something new, and you're like, oh, well, that's good. Robert, have you guys seen this? Have you seen this, Robert? And then you're like, Matt, have you seen this? Do you guys know this? Is this new? Is this or is this just a rehashing of something they did 5 years ago that I just don't remember? Yeah. So it's you have to have a passion for this. If you don't, then you shouldn't be here. Go back to blue team. Go back to red team. Something like that.
Hey, blue team is stressful.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of what Jordan was already saying, or even Matt, the opportunities to actually kick the adversary off the network, they don't come along all the time. So finding that new activity, finding those new tools and things like that on the network is the invigorating part for myself and as Jordan said, for them too. But there are times, just like Jordan was saying, the midnight calls or whatever, like even with that ransomware incident that took place on a Saturday, these guys aren't working on our schedule. So at points, I almost feel like I'm still in the military where you're technically on the clock 24/7, because we'll get, a message from the IR team on, on a Saturday at 4 a.m. Hey, we just saw this. And then, that your clock starts, you start, digging on it or whatever.
My thing is always, and I didn't figure this out until very, very recently. I had always pressured myself into thinking I had to know everything. I had to know every tactic, every attack group, every iteration of every log source and what can this thing do, and know every scenario. And I would get really down and doubt myself about it, about not knowing those things instantly. And then one day I was writing something or doing something and sitting down and be like, well, why don't I just ask a single question first? I don't know why I never thought of it like this, but it's not about knowing all of this stuff. It's not about like having this stuff. I get my jam from asking questions that lead to other questions that lead down rabbit holes and lead to somewhere. Like I love when I ask a right question. And that's why I love doing this stuff so much. Got a couple softer questions for you, leading right into this, because we're talking a lot about hours and the rush of it and things like that. Just a couple softer ones to kind of end this on a good note. It's been a great note so far. You guys are amazing. Any of you have tips? This is from @BoyerTim tweets. Tips for fending off burnout, hobbies, exercise. Everybody wants to eat relatively healthy and have hobbies, but he says 8 hours at work plus 3 hours of self-studying after work to level up is exhausting. So how do you guys fend off burnout? Because IR has got to be up there in the pantheon of stressful disciplines to be in security.
Yeah, I'll take first stab at that. I definitely have seen this type of fatigue, and there's a lot of turnover in IR consulting in general because of burnout and those types of things. And I've definitely have experienced that as well, burnout and fatigue and those types of things. And the issue is that IR consulting and doing incident response in general it's just a really demanding thing. There's never a lack of work to do. You could be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking at alerts or looking at or data that's just come back, or those types of things, and you're trying to push the investigation forward. And there's a certain unspoken kind of pressure to do that within the consulting field in general, and not just within IR, just within security consulting. There's a certain unspoken kind of competitive pressure to always be billing, or always be doing something, right? Finding evil, whatever it is that you're doing, right? And some of that is just people's general competitive nature, I think, and some of that is also can be pushed a little bit to the point where it's a little unhealthy as well. So what I like to do is just to go, I go and I take my dogs for walks periodically through the day. I go and I go and do something that's non-computer related. I get up and get away from my computer. I don't just switch from, looking at this incident response data to now I'm going to be surfing YouTube, right? Get up, get away from your computer, go do something, with your family, with your friends, that's completely non-security related, non-technical related, and just that's what I do, and that works for me.
Robert?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. The biggest thing is stepping away from your computer and looking at all the different reports and stuff like that, because that that stuff's going to be there the next day, unless, like I said, you're supporting some high pressure IR that is an ongoing event. But in between those events, like I said, just stepping away and my wife, I don't know if this is ADD that I have or something along those lines, but like I pick up really obscure hobbies and then and do them for a little while and then kind of just lose interest or whatever.
Dude, same.
Went through the whole 3D printer thing and was printing some stuff and designing some stuff, and then kind of like put that in the closet. And so now the thing is actually making like sneakers and stuff like that. I went to
That's awesome.
She randomly said, "Hey, wedding anniversary present. There's this class going on. Do you want to go to it?" And so we flew out to LA for like 4 days. I learned how to make some sneakers, and I've been doing that off and on as like I said, a way to get away from this. Cause like Matt says, you kind of just got to separate it. You can't, just live in your computer. Like that, I think that's one of the things that people don't work in the industry. They kind of, it's like one of those eye-opening of things or whatever. Like they think you're literally like just tied to your computer and you're always reading security reports and you're always figuring out this stuff. And yeah, you just gotta, like I said, decompress and just step away from the computer for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, it can get super hard, and I've said this a lot, especially for people who for hackers. It's in our blood. It's how I define myself. Like that's like if I had nothing else, I would still be trying to figure out how stuff works and how I can break it and how I can make it better. And it can get really stressful to have. And this is speaking for me. I don't think everybody is or by any means should be like this, of having so much of your own personal self-worth tied up in that, but then you also get a paycheck for it, which comes with a whole bunch of other stressors. So when you screw something up at work or something goes badly, I can't help but take it to heart because it's part of who I am. I do happen to, like, when I'm not doing work on a computer, I'm doing streaming like this for my own stuff. But I mean, Robert, you mentioned like having semi ADD and like different things. Like, I was Legos for a while. I still am. I picked that up like a year ago, and now I'm doing like landscaping, and then I picked up a chess thing, and now I have all these. The inundation of hobbies is becoming its own stressor. I mean, it's a good problem to have, but yeah, that's awesome. Like I was outside doing landscaping all day yesterday because what else am I going to do? But yeah, it's good to get away from that monitor. Jordan, how about you?
I've been doing a lot of like walks and activities with my kids. I mean, I know you and I share pictures all the time together, but
you owe me somebody.
I know. But like teaching the kids how to build lava lamps, stuff like that, taking them for walks, just anything we can do to kind of get out of the house and just do something different that's not in front of a screen. Because my wife and I both have this big mantra of like, get away from screens, because like I'm on a screen all day, every day. And even when I'm with clients, I'm still at a screen so I can take notes or whatever, right? Well, I still like to handwrite notes, but that's different. I think just for me, it's spending time with the kids, going for a walk, having a conversation with my buddies, and just talking about like one of my friends, he and I just talk about the most random stuff. Like we'll go from anime to like talking about like, the SR-71 versus the ox cart. Like we just have these random conversations, but it's just good to like kind of keep you like mentally aware and not just get sucked into one thing. So, that's kind of what I do is like, my buddy and I call it our therapy time. and then, just spending time with the family, doing that kind of stuff. So it's the same as with those days, like as Matt said, take the dogs for a walk, and Robert said, like get a hobby. So I won't talk about all my hobbies because
yeah. We've probably been talking about for an hour. Speaking of hobbies, one last question, coming from the great Jimmy Vo. What kind of hair product do you use?
Did Jimmy really ask that?
I swear to God.
He's traveled with me.
Well, he wants the people to know, maybe. As an interviewer, everything I ask you guys, most things, I already, behind the scenes, fourth wall break, I already know the answers. The thing about interviewing is to get you to say it to other people. So what hair product do you use?
I tend to use big sexy hair, and now I'm going to draw a blank.
Yes, you showed me a while ago. Oh, okay, Goop. Yeah, you showed me something in a tin a long time ago. It was like a green tin.
That was Bedhead.
Oh, okay.
I think that was Bedhead. And then that was the Kevin Murphy.
Yeah, Kevin Murphy. That's right.
Kevin Murphy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have
so
hair.
I switch between the days.
Yeah. And yes, legitimately, and when I do post-production on this, right above me, I am going to put the question from Twitter, the actual tweet where Jimmy asks that. So right there.
My question is, did he say big sexy hair?
Yes, he did.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure, dude. Oh, for sure. Google it.
It's literally
It's
called
a
Big
product.
Sexy Hair. All right, I'm going to Google it, and I'm going to put it right up here. It's one of those little, I'm going to do fancy tricks on my stream.
Yeah, no, it's mainly Kevin Murphy, and and then like a little touch of like big sexy hair if I need it. You know, like if I'm up all night and then I have to like fly into a client and I don't have time to actually do my hair. You just, you know.
No, I'm about to get really into makeup here soon because I do a lot more of the streaming now, and you can't see, well, you guys can see it on the camera, but I have lighting and stuff. I asked one of my friends, her name is Gabs. He's at Gab Smash on Twitter. I said, what do I need
Gab.
Yeah, everybody knows Gabs. Gabs is awesome. I said, what do I need to look like less of a gargoyle? And she actually gave me a link about some stuff I can put on. I mean, I don't think I look bad unless you zoom in. You zoom in, it is a dumpster fire on my face. So I'm going to get into makeup here soon, like just doing like concealer and stuff. One last question for everybody, and I swear you guys can go do actual IR works. I'm keeping you from that. This question, I don't know, maybe this would be for Matt. Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized fancy bears or one horse-sized equation group?
Man, that's a tough question.
I asked the hard questions here, Matt.
100 duck-sized fancy bears.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll go with the 100 duck-sized fancy bears because I can just kick entire groups of them as far as I possibly can.
That was a perfect answer. All right, listen, fellas, this is by far my favorite one I've done so far. I thought this was a lot of fun. I learned more about IR, and I hope other people did too. Do any of you have like blogs or anything that you're writing that you want to tell people about, or like where they can find out more about where you work and what you do?
Well, we do have a blog, Security Intelligence. So we do sometimes I put out blogs there, but that's from the entire, kind of IBM security realm. But there are some focused incident response and threat intelligence blog posts that we put out there.
Cool. And then I will put links up to those in post. Yeah. I didn't know if like you guys kept like personal blogs about things or whatever. A lot of people do that. So no, that's awesome.
Twitter and Instagram are my personal blogs.
That's what I'm talking about. Like
Twitter.
Find you on Twitter or find you on Instagram. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe Robert's like a chef that I don't know about. And he has an Instagram that he posts chef pictures.
Dude, he makes shoes, dude. He's a sneaker geek.
Oh, that's right. The shoe thing. Like Robert, do you do anything with your like? Do you post your shoes and stuff?
I got to do a better job of that. I'm not part of the millennial group, I guess. So I'm not active on those platforms. I try to post things every once in a while, but it's few and far between, I guess. Just keeping things personal, I guess. That's just my mentality as the way I was raised. You don't have to broadcast everything you do.
For sure.
I don't need to show everybody what I ate for dinner last night.
Yeah, nobody wants to.
But I want to know. I have to know. Did you have a kale salad? No.
I had one box of Cocoa Puffs. One entire box of Cocoa Puffs. No, that's awesome. What'd you say, Jordan?
But yeah, I have to point out to you, and this is post-production thing. You called me Joey a bunch of times in this.
Oh, did I? Shit. Oh, okay, I'll try to edit that.
No, leave it, because I mean you already put me on blast. So
did I?
Yeah, you use my handle, dummy.
Well, that's what I've always called, because like I didn't know your real name for like a couple of years.
You should add that the reason that you have the rando name is from me, by the way.
Oh yeah, well if I'm gonna edit out Joey, then I'm not gonna talk about rando because then it makes no segue sense.
No, you leave Joey. It's fine. I just was pointing it out to you as a funny thing.
Yes. Okay. So I'm leaving all of this in. Everybody can see how the sausage is made, as we talked about earlier. As somebody might not know, and this is like we're getting to the end of it. We all, some of us have, a lot of us have handles, little jolly pirate hacker nicknames, and I only knew Jordan by his handle. And when I found out his real name, it hasn't processed with me. So I totally blew him up already. My handle that people call me is Rando, Randoh, and I got that from trolling Jordan. God. We were in the same, when I was first coming up and I was getting friends and that kind of thing, talk about like trying to fend off burnout, finding friends. And he was in a chat room and I came in and said hi. And he was like, ugh, who's this rando? Which is internet speak for who's this random idiot. And I was like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't talk in here anymore. That guy's kind of mad. And then I got off and I'm like, forget that guy. So I started calling myself Rando in public and now that's how it stuck. Because I thought George, whatever. I give up now. I thought you were a jerk, so that's why I have this name, because you were mean to me in a chat room.
And now we share kids' pictures, right?
Now we share kids' pictures, late night phone calls. I guarantee if I lived where you live, we'd be in the backyard or the front porch yelling at kids. That's how we are. God, you were such a jerk. All right. I've kept you guys for way over an hour. You have more important things to do. So from the great company IBM, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Jordan. This was awesome. And some more podcasts coming y'all's way. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks much to Danny and the Gigamon team, as well as the IBM X-Force team, for a great video podcast today on TechStrong TV. That's going to wrap things up for Tuesday, June 16th. We'll be back with fresh content on Thursday, June 18th. Tomorrow we'll be replaying one of our highlighted first 50 or so episodes. Hope you'll enjoy that. And catch us back here on Thursday when we'll have more great news. Until then, this is Alan Schimmel, hoping you stay safe, stay well, stay strong, tech strong. We're out.